I am Madeline, 34 years old, and my 10-year-old son was taking his last breaths in a freezing hospital room when I begged my own parents for help. Their response was to tell me to hire a babysitter because they were packing for a luxury yacht party. When I called my ex-husband in a panic, he complained that I was interrupting his Tesla shopping spree with his mistress. A month later, my sweet boy passed away, and my family did not even show up to his funeral. They were too busy popping champagne and posting photos online. But as I stood in the rain staring at his grave, they had no idea that their cruel abandonment was the exact reason I would systematically dismantle their entire lives, leaving them with absolutely nothing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own sanity. The rhythmic mechanical beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound keeping me tethered to reality. The pediatric intensive care unit was kept freezing cold, but I was sweating, my hands trembling as I gripped the thin plastic railing of Leo's hospital bed. My brave 10-year-old boy looked so small amidst the tangle of tubes and wires. His battle with leukemia had drained the color from his cheeks, leaving him pale and fragile. I had not slept in 3 days. The doctors had just delivered the news that Leo's organs were failing, and they needed to perform an emergency high-risk surgery within the hour. But there was a massive complication. I needed to sign the consent forms and speak with the surgical team, but my 3 other children, Mason, who was 8, Lily, who was 6, and little 3-year-old Noah, were sitting in the hospital waiting room with a kind neighbor who urgently needed to leave for her night shift. I could not bring 3 young, terrified children into the ICU, and I could not leave Leo alone. I needed my family. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother, Brenda. The line rang 4 times before she picked up. The background noise on her end was loud, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. "Mom, I need you," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my exhaustion. "Leo is crashing. They are taking him into emergency surgery right now. I need you and Dad to come to the hospital to watch Mason, Lily, and Noah so I can talk to the surgeons." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Madeline, you are breaking up. The connection in this house is terrible." "Mom, please," I begged, tears spilling over my eyelashes. "It is a matter of life and death. The neighbor has to leave. I just need you here for a few hours." "Madeline, you know perfectly well what this weekend is." My mother snapped, her tone dripping with annoyance. "We are packing for Caroline's baby shower. Jamal rented that gorgeous luxury yacht for the entire weekend, and we have to be at the marina in 2 hours. I cannot just drop everything and show up at the hospital with my luggage." I stared at the wall, unable to comprehend her words. My sister Caroline was having a baby shower on a yacht with her husband Jamal, and my mother was prioritizing a party over her dying grandson. Mom, Leo might not make it through the night. "Stop being so dramatic," Brenda scolded. "You always blow things out of proportion. Hire a sitter, Madeline. You are not the first woman to have a sick kid. You decided to have 4 children on a freelance writer's income, so you need to figure out how to manage them. Do not ruin your sister's special weekend with your negativity. We will send Leo a balloon arrangement on Monday." The line went dead. She actually hung up on me. My chest heaved as I tried to pull air into my lungs. The sterile smell of alcohol and iodine suddenly made me nauseous. My own mother had essentially told me my son's life was an inconvenience to her social calendar. Panic seized me. The neighbor texted saying she had to leave in 10 minutes. I had no other choice. I had to make the hardest call of my life. I had to call my ex-husband, Derek. Derek had walked out on us a year ago when Leo's diagnosis became too difficult for him to handle. He was a sales director who cared more about his golf handicap than his children. I dialed his number, praying he would have a shred of paternal instinct left. "What do you want?" Madeline, Derek answered brusquely. "Derek, you need to get to the hospital right now," I pleaded. "Leo is going into emergency surgery. His organs are failing. I need you to watch the other kids." A woman's high-pitched laugh echoed in the background. Derek shushed her playfully before responding to me. "I am a little busy right now. We are at the Tesla showroom. Courtney is picking out the interior colors for her new Model Y. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Your son is dying, Derek. I do not care about your mistress or her car. Get to the hospital. Look, you are just a broke ghostwriter who cannot manage her own life, Derek snarled, his voice turning vicious. You fought for primary custody, so this is your problem. Deal with it yourself. Stop calling me and ruining my day. He disconnected the call. I stood in the freezing hospital room completely and utterly abandoned. The people who were supposed to protect and support me had left me to drown in my darkest hour. I wiped my tears, squared my shoulders, and walked out to the waiting room. I paid a hospital cafeteria worker $50 out of my dwindling bank account to sit with my 3 kids in the lobby while I rushed back to sign the surgical consent forms. I faced the nightmare alone. Despite the surgery, despite the endless prayers, the damage to Leo's small body was too severe. A month later, the steady beeping of the monitor flatlined, and my beautiful 10-year-old boy took his final breath. The pain that ripped through my soul was indescribable, an agonizing void that threatened to swallow me whole. The funeral was held on a dreary, rain-soaked Tuesday. I stood under a black umbrella, clutching the hands of Mason and Lily, while little Noah rested on my hip. The cemetery was heartbreakingly empty. My parents did not show up. Caroline and Jamal did not show up. Derek did not show up. I buried my son with only a few kind nurses and neighbors in attendance. As the casket was lowered into the ground, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, numb to the freezing rain hitting my screen. It was a notification from social media. Caroline had just started a live video. I clicked on it. There were my parents, my sister and Jamal, standing on the deck of a massive yacht bathed in sunshine. They were popping champagne, laughing loudly and toasting to Caroline's perfect life. My mother was smiling for the camera, holding up a designer gift bag. Watching them celebrate while I stood in the mud next to my child's grave, something inside me fundamentally shifted. The tears stopped falling. The agonizing grief hardened into something cold, sharp, and unbreakable. I realized in that moment that I did not have a family. I had parasites who fed on my energy and discarded me when I was no longer convenient. I looked down at my 3 remaining children, their innocent faces looking up at me for guidance. I promised myself right then and there that I would protect them at all costs. And I promised Leo that the people who abandoned him would pay for their cruelty. A terrifying calmness washed over me as I put my phone away. The grieving mother was gone. The architect of their destruction had just been born. 2 weeks passed since I buried my son in the cold mud. The silence in my small house was suffocating. I spent my days moving like a ghost, packing Leo's clothes into cardboard boxes, while Mason, Lily, and Noah were at school and daycare. Every baseball cap and superhero shirt felt like a shard of glass in my chest. I was sealing a box of his favorite comic books when a loud, aggressive knock echoed through the hallway. It was not a polite tap, it was a demand. I opened the front door to find my parents Brenda and Gregory, along with my sister Caroline and her husband Jamal. They stood on my porch looking completely out of place in my modest neighborhood. Jamal, an African-American crypto investor who loved to flaunt his supposed wealth, was wearing a tailored designer suit and a flashy gold watch. Caroline clutched a brand new Hermes bag, the exact one she had been bragging about on her yacht livestream. My parents looked equally pristine, their faces arranged in masks of practiced sympathy that did not reach their eyes. I foolishly thought for one split second that they had come to apologize, that the reality of Leo's death had finally pierced their bubble of selfishness. I stepped aside, letting them into the cramped living room. Jamal did not even offer a word of condolence. He looked around my home with barely concealed disgust, brushed past me, and dropped a thick stack of legal documents onto my scratched kitchen table. He tapped the paperwork with manicured fingers. "We need your signature on these release forms today," Madeline Jamal said smoothly, using his best salesman voice. "The platform has placed a temporary hold on the account until the primary beneficiary signs off. It is just standard procedure." I stared at the documents, confusion quickly morphing into sickening dread. I pulled the papers closer. There, printed on the very first page, was a screenshot of a GoFundMe campaign. The title read, "Supporting Our Little Angel, Leo's Final Journey." Below it was a photo of my son. Not a happy photo from his childhood, but a vulnerable, heartbreaking picture of him unconscious in his hospital bed. The exact photo I had privately sent to my family group chat months ago, begging for their prayers. The total raised amount glowed in bold green numbers: $150,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook as I looked up at the four people standing in my kitchen. "You monetized my son's death," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it scared me. "You used a picture of him dying to raise $150,000, and you never even told me." Caroline rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, her designer bracelets clinking together. "Do not make this a tragedy, Madeline. People wanted to help. We simply provided an avenue for their generosity." Jamal stepped forward, flashing a greasy smile. "Look, I am going to move this capital into my crypto portfolio. The market is primed right now. I can easily triple this amount in 6 months. It is going to yield massive returns for the family. We can use the profits to cover Caroline's yacht expenses and maybe throw a little your way to help with the other kids. They were going to use my dead son's face to pay off their luxury vacations." I shoved the papers back across the table. "I am not signing anything. This is fraud. You raised this money under the pretense of paying for Leo's medical bills and funeral bills that you refuse to help me with. Bills that I am drowning in right now." Brenda stepped forward, her face twisting into a scowl of pure entitlement. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Listen to me, Madeline. Leo is dead. This money is not going to bring him back. You are living in the past while this family has real, immediate financial needs. Stop being so incredibly selfish and sign the paper. Save this family for once in your life." I ripped my arm out of her grasp. The cold, terrifying numbness from the cemetery returned, freezing every drop of affection I had ever held for the woman standing in front of me. I picked up my phone from the counter. I did not scream. I did not cry. I calmly dialed a number and put it on speakerphone, holding it up for all of them to see. "Thank you for calling the GoFundMe Fraud and Safety Department. How can I help you?" the automated voice echoed in the silent kitchen. Jamal's smug expression instantly vanished. His eyes widened in sheer panic. He lunged across the table, trying to snatch the phone from my hand. "Have you lost your mind?" he shouted. "Hang up the phone right now." I took a sharp step back, dodging his grasp. "Hello," I said clearly to the human representative who had just connected. "My name is Madeline. I am reporting a fraudulent campaign using photographs of my deceased son, Leo. I am his mother and sole guardian. The campaign organizers, Caroline and Jamal, are attempting to divert $150,000 for personal luxury expenses and high-risk cryptocurrency investments. I have the campaign ID number ready for you." Gregory's face turned purple with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You vindictive little brat. I will disown you. You will have nothing. You are already nothing to me," I fired back, my voice echoing off the walls. "Get out of my house, all of you. Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing to add to your wire fraud charges." Caroline started hyperventilating, grabbing Jamal's arm as the reality of a federal fraud investigation dawned on her. Brenda cursed at me, calling me a monster, a failure of a daughter. They scrambled out the front door, slipping on the porch in their haste to flee. I watched their expensive SUV peel out of my driveway, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. I locked the deadbolt, feeling a massive weight lift from my shoulders. The toxic anchor I had dragged my entire life was finally cut loose. I walked back to the kitchen table to throw away the fraudulent papers. As I gathered them, my phone chimed with an incoming email notification. It was from the county family court. I opened the message and my heart hammered against my ribs. Derek had just filed an emergency petition to reduce his child support payments for Mason, Lily, and Noah, citing my status as an unfit, broke freelance writer. He was trying to financially starve me into surrendering custody of my remaining children. He thought I was weak. He thought I was beaten. He had no idea what I was about to unleash. I am Madeline, 34 years old, and my 10-year-old son was taking his last breaths in a freezing hospital room when I begged my own parents for help. Their response was to tell me to hire a babysitter because they were packing for a luxury yacht party. When I called my ex-husband in a panic, he complained that I was interrupting his Tesla shopping spree with his mistress. A month later, my sweet boy passed away, and my family did not even show up to his funeral. They were too busy popping champagne and posting photos online. But as I stood in the rain staring at his grave, they had no idea that their cruel abandonment was the exact reason I would systematically dismantle their entire lives, leaving them with absolutely nothing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own sanity. The fluorescent lights of the family courthouse buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the waiting area. I sat on the wooden bench intentionally, wearing an oversized faded cardigan and scuffed sneakers. My hair was tied back in a messy knot, and I had skipped makeup entirely. I looked exactly like the exhausted, defeated, broke single mother my ex-husband desperately wanted me to be. Derek strutted down the hallway moments later, flanked by a high-priced lawyer whose suit probably cost more than my minivan. Derek shot me a look of pure contempt, adjusting his designer tie. He was practically vibrating with arrogance, eager to financially crush the woman he had abandoned. Inside the courtroom, Derek's attorney painted a pathetic picture of my life. He presented my freelance writing career as a delusional hobby, citing my fluctuating income and claiming I was unfit to maintain the lifestyle Mason, Lily, and Noah deserved. Derek was petitioning to slash his child support payments by 70%, arguing that he should not be forced to subsidize my supposed financial irresponsibility. The judge looked at me over his glasses, asking if I had a rebuttal. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders slumped in a posture of complete surrender. Your Honor, I said, my voice trembling perfectly on cue. I admit my income as a writer has been unpredictable. I cannot afford a protracted legal battle. I will agree to the drastic reduction in his child support payments. I will accept his financial terms entirely, but only on one condition. I want sole legal and physical custody of the children. Derek will have no decision-making power over their lives. Derek's eyes lit up with greedy triumph. He did not care about the kids. He only cared about his bank account and his new mistress. To him, surrendering his parental rights was a victory because it meant severing his financial obligations to me. He whispered eagerly to his lawyer, nodding vigorously. Within 20 minutes, the paperwork was drafted and signed. Derek had legally signed away his children to save a few $1,000s a month. As we walked out of the courtroom, Derek stopped next to me. "Good luck paying the rent with your little writing hobby, Madeline," he sneered, straightening his cuffs. "Try not to end up on the street." I did not say a word. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor until he walked away, his cruel laughter echoing down the corridor. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I walked to my battered minivan, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The facade of the broken woman vanished instantly. My posture straightened. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and refreshed the screen. The balance updated, glowing brightly against the screen. $2,500,000. Derek thought my writing was a pathetic hobby. What he did not know was that during those endless, agonizing nights, sitting beside Leo in the intensive care unit, I had not just been crying. I had been typing. I poured every ounce of my rage, my terror, and my suffocating grief into a psychological thriller. I channeled the betrayal of my parents and the cruelty of my husband into a dark, gripping narrative. I submitted the manuscript under the pen name M.L. Blackwood, keeping my true identity a closely guarded secret. The book had exploded. It shot straight to the top of the New York Times bestseller list within weeks of publication. Readers devoured the raw emotion and twisting plot. The massive deposit sitting in my checking account was just the first wave of royalties, and the money was only going to multiply. Just days before Derek filed his petty lawsuit, my literary agent had called me sobbing with joy. A major streaming network had purchased the film adaptation rights to my book for an 8-figure sum. I was quietly, secretly, unfathomably rich. But I knew better than to upgrade my life immediately. If my parents or Derek caught wind of my sudden wealth, they would descend like vultures. They would file frivolous lawsuits, claim they were owed a portion of my success, or try to manipulate the courts. I had to build a fortress. The following morning, I drove into the city to meet with a top-tier corporate attorney who specialized in wealth management and asset protection. Sitting in his sleek glass office, overlooking the skyline, I laid out my plan. We established an anonymous Delaware limited liability company named M Holdings. Delaware laws allowed me to operate completely under the radar, shielding my identity from public records. My lawyer meticulously funneled my royalties and the massive streaming network payout directly into corporate trusts. Derek and my toxic family could search all they wanted, but on paper, Madeline, the freelance writer, was barely scraping by. Once the fortress was built, it was time to load the cannons. I sat down with my newly appointed wealth manager and slid 2 specific files across his polished desk. I do not want to just invest in stocks, I told him, my voice colder than ice. I want to acquire real estate debt. Specifically, I want M Holdings to purchase the mortgage on this residential estate, and I want to buy the commercial property listed in this second file. My wealth manager reviewed the documents, raising an eyebrow. He was looking at the deed to Brenda and Gregory's pristine suburban mansion, the very house where they hosted their lavish parties to impress their wealthy friends. The second document was the commercial deed for the office building where Derek served as the regional sales director. I want to own the ground they walk on, I instructed my wealth manager. Buy the debt from their banks. Offer a premium if you have to. Do whatever it takes, but do not let them know that M Holdings is their new landlord. He nodded, a sharp smile forming on his lips. Consider it done, ma'am. For the next year, I played my part perfectly. I continued driving my minivan. I shopped at discount grocery stores. I lived in my modest house with Mason, Lily, and Noah, ensuring they had everything they needed in private, but maintaining a humble exterior. I watched from the shadows as the people who abandoned Leo continued to flaunt their fake debt-fueled lives on social media. But the economy was shifting. The facade of their luxurious lifestyles was beginning to crack. And when my wealth manager called me 11 months later with an urgent update on my brother-in-law, Jamal, I knew the dominoes were finally starting to fall. Jamal's cryptocurrency scheme had completely collapsed under federal scrutiny, and the devastation was about to hit my parents' doorstep. The reckoning was no longer a distant plan. It was arriving today. The reckoning was no longer a distant plan. It was arriving today. I sat in my home office sipping my morning coffee while watching the financial news networks. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen confirmed what my wealth manager had told me. The federal government had just seized the assets of a major cryptocurrency exchange, the exact platform Jamal had built his entire fake empire upon. Jamal was not just a casual investor. He had been acting as an unlicensed broker, recruiting his wealthy social circle to buy into a massive Ponzi scheme. The IRS had officially frozen his accounts and slapped him with a staggering tax lien. Later that afternoon, my private investigator sent me a video update. It showed 2 heavy-duty tow trucks pulling up to Caroline and Jamal's upscale leased property. Caroline was standing in her driveway, screaming hysterically and waving her arms as the repo men hitched up her prized Range Rover and Jamal's customized sports car. Her neighbors were watching from their porches, recording every humiliating second on their phones. The flawless facade of the golden child was shattering in real time. But the collateral damage was the sweetest part. Brenda and Gregory had always worshipped wealth and status above all else. To maintain their image and impress their country club friends, they had foolishly co-signed several of Jamal's high-interest business loans. When Jamal defaulted, The creditors immediately went after my parents. Their pristine suburban mansion, the one they had proudly paraded in front of their friends for decades, was suddenly heavily encumbered. And because my anonymous company had quietly purchased their mortgage debt months ago, I was the one holding the leash. I instructed my wealth manager to issue the official notice of default. I imagined the exact moment the certified mail arrived at their grand mahogany front door. Brenda opening the thick envelope, her manicured hands trembling as she read the bold words outlining the foreclosure proceedings. They scrambled, of course. My private investigator tracked their desperate movements over the next few weeks. Gregory tried to call in favors from his golf buddies, but in their affluent circles, financial ruin is a contagious disease. No one answered his calls. Their credit lines were slashed to zero. The country club quietly revoked their membership due to unpaid dues. Meanwhile, Derek was facing his own spectacular implosion. He had always been arrogant, strutting around the commercial office building where he served as a regional sales director. What he did not know was that my corporation had acquired that exact building 3 months prior. As the new landlord, I had ordered a comprehensive financial audit of the building's lease agreements and tenant operations. The audit uncovered a massive internal embezzlement scandal within Derek's department. He had been inflating sales figures and funneling corporate funds into a secret offshore account to fund his lavish lifestyle with his new wife. The company's board of directors, terrified of losing their office lease and facing a massive lawsuit from the building's powerful new ownership, fired Derek immediately. Security escorted him out of the lobby with his belongings packed into a single cardboard box. When his new wife discovered the stolen money was gone, and Derek was facing potential criminal charges, she filed for divorce, taking half of what little he had left and leaving him entirely destitute. But Derek was a cornered rat, and rats are dangerous. Broke and furious, he convinced himself that I must be hiding money to survive. He hired a shady private investigator using the last of his credit cards, demanding to know how I was supporting the children without his child support payments. The investigator dug deep. He could not pierce the impenetrable veil of my corporate trusts, but he found a tiny, overlooked digital footprint connecting my home internet address to the copyright registration of the best-selling novel. Derek received the report. I received an alert from my own security team that my background had been extensively searched. I knew exactly what Derek was thinking. He believed he had hit the ultimate jackpot. He thought he could claim 50% of my book royalties as a hidden marital asset. The storm was converging perfectly. It was the week of Thanksgiving. The air outside was freezing, the wind biting through the bare branches of the trees, serving as a chilling reminder of the harsh winter night when Leo was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. I stood in my cozy, warm kitchen basting a turkey while the rich scent of roasted vegetables and cinnamon filled the air. My 3 surviving children, Mason, Lily, and Noah, were sitting comfortably by the fireplace, laughing as they played a board game. I looked at their smiling faces and felt a profound sense of peace. I had secured their future. I had shielded them from the cruelty of my parents and the selfishness of their father. We were safe and we were happy. Suddenly, the tranquility of our holiday evening was shattered by a loud, aggressive pounding on the front door. The heavy thuds echoed through the hallway. It was not a polite, friendly knock. It was the frantic, entitled hammering of people who believed the world owed them everything. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over to the security camera monitor resting on my kitchen counter. Standing on my front porch, shivering in the freezing wind, were Brenda, Gregory, Caroline, and Jamal. They were surrounded by a pile of designer suitcases, their faces pinched with cold and sheer desperation. The bank had officially locked them out of their mansion, and Jamal's leased property had been seized by federal authorities. With their credit ruined and their wealthy friends refusing to answer their calls, they had nowhere else to go. They had come to demand shelter from the very daughter they had abandoned and discarded. I smiled a slow, deliberate smile. I poured myself a full glass of red wine, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front door. The execution was about to begin. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open. The freezing November wind whipped through the entryway, carrying with it the scent of impending snow. Brenda pushed past me immediately, not offering a greeting, not waiting for an invitation. She stomped her expensive leather boots on my welcome mat, shivering violently, as she dragged a massive designer suitcase behind her. Gregory followed, his face red from the biting cold, muttering something about the horrific traffic. Caroline and Jamal trailed behind them, looking utterly miserable. Jamal glared at the modest exterior of my home, shaking his head in disgust as he hauled two oversized bags over the threshold. I closed the door, blocking out the freezing wind. I stood there, holding my glass of red wine, my expression completely neutral. "It is freezing out there," Brenda snapped, rubbing her arms. "Madeline, tell Mason, Lily, and Noah to pack their things into the guest room right now. Caroline and Jamal need the master suite. They have been through a terrible ordeal today, and they need their privacy. Your father and I will take the boys' room." Caroline dropped her handbag onto my hallway table, letting out a dramatic sigh. "This house is so small, Madeline. It smells like roasted garlic and cheap air freshener. But I guess we can make it work for a few weeks until Jamal's lawyers sort out this ridiculous misunderstanding with the federal government." I took a slow sip of my wine. The sheer audacity of these people was breathtaking. They had abandoned my son as he lay dying, tried to steal money using his hospital photos, and treated me like absolute garbage for my entire life. Now, completely stripped of their wealth and status, they marched into my home and started barking orders as if I were their maid. Gregory stepped forward, adopting his usual pompous, authoritative posture. He adjusted his collar, trying to look like the powerful patriarch he used to be. "Now, Madeline. I know we have had our differences in the past." He began, using that condescending tone I knew so well. "But family sticks together in times of crisis. We are the victims of a ruthless, faceless corporate entity. Some predatory company called M Holdings bought out the debt on our estate and aggressively pushed through a foreclosure. They gave us absolutely no warning. We were thrown out into the cold." Jamal scoffed loudly from the living room doorway. "The whole system is rigged against black investors like me. The Fed seized my platforms just because they do not understand decentralized finance. But my legal team is going to destroy them. I just need a place to operate from while I restructure my assets. Do you have high-speed internet here? Or is it as basic as the rest of this place?" I smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed smile. I looked at the four of them standing in my hallway, stripped of their power, stripped of their money, relying entirely on the daughter they had thrown away. "Why do you not all go sit down in the living room?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I need to get something from my office." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Do not take too long. I want dinner served soon. We have been sitting in traffic for 2 hours and I am starving." I walked into the kitchen where Mason, Lily, and Noah were sitting at the island eating slices of apples. I leaned down and kissed each of their foreheads. "Take your board games upstairs to my bedroom and close the door," I whispered to them softly. "Do not come down until I tell you. I have some adult business to handle." They nodded, gathered their games, and hurried upstairs. I waited until I heard my bedroom door click shut. Then I walked into my home office, unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, and pulled out a thick manila folder. The emblem of my Delaware limited liability company was embossed on the front cover. I walked back into the living room. Gregory had already made himself comfortable in my favorite armchair while Brenda was inspecting the dust on my mantelpiece with a critical eye. Caroline and Jamal were slouched on the sofa, scrolling angrily on their phones. I stood at the head of the coffee table and dropped the thick manila folder right in the center. The heavy thud made all four of them jump. "It is funny you mentioned M Holdings, Dad," I said, taking another sip of my wine. Gregory looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Do you know something about this predatory company?" "I know everything about it," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Because I am the sole owner, founder, and chairman of M Holdings." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the crackle of the wood burning in the fireplace. Brenda let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Madeleine, stop speaking nonsense. You are a broke freelance writer. You can barely afford to feed your own children. Do not try to make jokes right now. We are not in the mood. Open the folder, I commanded. Gregory leaned forward slowly. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. The first document on top was the official foreclosure deed for their suburban mansion. Stamped at the bottom were the legal transfer signatures, finalizing the repossession. Attached to it was the corporate ownership structure of M Holdings, clearly listing my legal name as the sole controlling entity. Gregory's eyes widened in sheer terror. His face drained of all color, turning an ashen, sickly gray. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. "What is it?" Brenda demanded, snatching the papers from his hands. She scanned the documents, her eyes darting back and forth across the legal text. When she saw my name, the paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered onto the floor. "You?" Brenda gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "You bought our mortgage debt. You are the one who evicted us." "Yes," I said, savoring every single syllable. "I bought your debt for pennies on the dollar. I orchestrated the foreclosure. I signed the eviction order that locked you out of your precious mansion this afternoon. You said M Holdings gave you no warning. That is incorrect. The warning was given the day you abandoned Leo in the hospital to go to a yacht party." Jamal sprang up from the sofa, his fists clenched. "You think you are smart? You think you can play games with us? You are nothing but a pathetic loser who got lucky. I will sue you for everything you have." "You do not have the money to sue a parking meter, Jamal." I shot back, locking eyes with him. "The federal government seized every penny you stole. Your crypto accounts are frozen. Your cars are gone. You are broke. And as for you, Caroline..." I shifted my gaze to my sister, who was shrinking into the cushions of the sofa. "You used pictures of my dying son to scam strangers out of $150,000. You thought you got away with it because you drove off in your expensive cars. But the universe always collects its debts." Gregory fell to his knees, gripping the edge of the coffee table. "Madeline, please," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "We are your parents. We gave you life. You cannot do this to us. We have nowhere to go. We have zero money. You have to let us stay here." I looked down at the man who had disowned me, who had called me a failure, who had stood by while his wife gaslighted me over my child's death. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I said coldly. "You are about to be homeless, but you will not be staying in my house. The eviction notice on your mansion gave you until tomorrow to remove your remaining personal items from the garage. But since you are here, I am officially accelerating that timeline. I am giving you exactly 5 minutes to take your designer luggage and walk out my front door. If you are not off my property when that clock runs out, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Brenda burst into hysterical tears, falling to the floor next to Gregory. She reached out to grab my leg, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch, as if it were toxic. "Madeline, you cannot throw us out into the freezing cold on Thanksgiving night. We will freeze. We will starve." I stared down at her without a single ounce of pity. "You told me to hire a babysitter when Leo was dying, Brenda, so I suggest you hire a real estate agent now." Jamal let out a furious roar and lunged forward, raising his fist to strike me. He thought he could intimidate me with physical violence. He thought I was just an unprotected woman. He was wrong. Before Jamal could take a second step, the blinding flash of red and blue lights suddenly erupted outside my living room windows, illuminating the walls with a chaotic, strobing glare. Sirens wailed loudly, cutting through the howling winter wind. Heavy boots pounded up the wooden steps of my front porch. I did not flinch. I just looked at Jamal and smiled. "You really should not have tried to steal money across state lines, Jamal. Wire fraud is a federal offense." The heavy front door was suddenly kicked open. The heavy front door was suddenly kicked open. A team of federal agents swarmed into my living room, their dark tactical gear a stark, terrifying contrast to the designer luggage scattered across my floor. The freezing November wind howled through the open doorway, but it was nothing compared to the absolute ice that settled over the room. "Jamal Davis, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud and money laundering," the lead agent barked. He grabbed Jamal by the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him firmly against the wall. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly. Caroline dropped to her knees, screaming hysterically as she watched her husband being restrained. Brenda and Gregory cowered in the corner of my living room, their faces completely drained of color. The reality of their golden child's ruin was finally setting in. They were watching the empire of lies they had worshipped crumble into dust. Just as the agents dragged a shouting, panicked Jamal out into the freezing night, another car pulled up to my driveway. A man stepped out, completely oblivious to the federal agents securing the perimeter. It was my ex-husband, Derek. He strutted up the concrete walkway, holding a thick stack of legal papers, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he had uncovered my secret corporate assets and was about to extort me for millions in marital property. Looking at his arrogant face through the open doorway, my mind instantly transported back to exactly 1 year ago. I remembered the day he thought he had destroyed me. A year earlier, the fluorescent lights of the family courthouse buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the waiting area. I sat alone on a hard wooden bench, executing my plan flawlessly. I was intentionally wearing an oversized faded gray cardigan that had seen much better days. I paired it with cheap, ill-fitting jeans and a pair of scuffed sneakers. I had scrubbed my face completely clean of any makeup, letting the dark circles under my eyes show prominently. I needed to look exactly like the exhausted, defeated, broke single mother that Derek desperately wanted me to be. Derek strutted down the courthouse hallway moments later, flanked by a high-priced attorney whose custom-tailored suit probably cost more than my minivan. Derek shot me a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, adjusting his silk tie with a smirk. He was practically vibrating with arrogance, eager to financially crush the woman he had abandoned while our son was dying. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was rigid and formal. Derek's attorney wasted no time painting a pathetic, desperate picture of my life to the judge. He presented my freelance writing career as a delusional, unprofitable hobby that I refused to give up. He confidently cited my fluctuating monthly income and loudly claimed I was unfit to maintain the lifestyle that Mason, Lily, and Noah deserved. Derek was officially petitioning to slash his child support payments by 80%. His lawyer argued passionately to the judge that a successful regional sales director should not be forced to subsidize his ex-wife's supposed financial irresponsibility, especially when he was trying to build a new life with his soon-to-be new wife. The judge peered down at me over his reading glasses, his expression a mix of stern authority and mild pity. He asked if I had a legal counsel present, or a rebuttal to these aggressive claims. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders slumped in a perfect posture of complete surrender. I let my voice tremble, playing the desperate victim exactly on cue. "Your Honor," I said softly, "I admit my income as a writer has been highly unpredictable. I do not have the funds to afford a protracted legal battle to fight these claims. I am exhausted. I will agree to the drastic reduction in his child support payments. I will accept his financial terms entirely." Derek's lawyer smiled triumphantly, turning to give his client a knowing nod. They thought I was breaking under the pressure. But then I looked up, letting tears brim in my eyes, playing the helpless mother to absolute perfection. "I have only one condition," I said, my voice wavering just enough to sound vulnerable. "I want sole legal and physical custody of the children. Derek will have zero decision-making power over their education, their medical care, or their daily lives. If he wants to drastically cut his financial ties to his children, he must sever his legal ties as well." The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked over at the petitioner's table. Derek's eyes lit up with greedy, unfiltered triumph. He did not care about Mason. He did not care about Lily. He certainly did not care about little Noah. He only cared about his bank account, his luxury cars, and his mistress. To him, surrendering his parental rights was not a loss. It was a massive victory, because it meant he was completely off the hook for weekend visitations, parent-teacher conferences, and emotional responsibilities. He whispered eagerly to his lawyer, nodding vigorously. His attorney immediately stood up and informed the judge that my terms were acceptable to his client. The judge asked me to confirm that I understood the immense financial and emotional burden I was taking on by accepting sole custody with minimal financial support. I looked the judge dead in the eye and stated that I fully understood. Within 20 minutes, the binding legal paperwork was drafted, reviewed, and signed by all parties. Derek had legally signed away his own children to save a few $1,000s a month. As we walked out of the courtroom, Derek stopped right next to me. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne suffocatingly strong. "Good luck paying the rent with your little writing hobby, Madeline," he sneered, straightening his cuffs with a satisfied laugh. "Try not to end up on the street. I hear homeless shelters are terrible for kids." I did not say a single word in response. I kept my eyes fixed on the cracked linoleum floor until he walked away, his cruel laughter echoing down the long corridor. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I walked briskly to my battered minivan, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The facade of the broken, helpless woman vanished in an instant. My posture straightened. My tears dried up completely. I pulled out my phone, opened my highly secure banking app, and refreshed the screen. The loading circle spun for a second before the balance updated, glowing brightly against the screen. A $2.5 million royalty deposit had just cleared. Derek thought my writing was a pathetic joke. He had absolutely no idea that the psychological thriller I had written during those agonizing nights next to Leo's hospital bed had just spent 12 consecutive weeks at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. He had no idea I was quietly, secretly, unfathomably rich. And as I stared at the man walking up to my front porch on Thanksgiving night, holding his useless legal papers, I knew he was about to find out just how badly he had miscalculated. To understand just how badly Derek had miscalculated and the sheer magnitude of his impending humiliation, you have to go back to the darkest, most agonizing days of my life. Go back to the pediatric intensive care unit. The air in that room was constantly freezing, smelling of strong antiseptics and lingering despair. While other mothers might have crumbled completely under the weight of such tragedy, I found my only lifeline in a cheap, refurbished laptop with a sticky keyboard. Leo would sleep for hours, heavily sedated, his small chest rising and falling to the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. I could not sleep. If I closed my eyes, the terror of losing him would consume me entirely. So I typed. I typed furiously in the dim blue glow of the monitor while the world outside continued spinning. I took every single ounce of the rage I felt toward my parents, who chose a yacht party over their dying grandson. I took the suffocating, acidic betrayal of a husband who was busy buying luxury cars with his mistress, while our son fought for his life. I channeled all that toxic, boiling agony into a psychological thriller. The villain in my story was a composite of everyone who had failed me, a ruthless, narcissistic force that destroyed everything it touched while wearing a perfect, socially acceptable mask. Writing became my survival mechanism. It was my silent scream into the void. I finished the manuscript the exact same week Leo passed away. I chose a pen name to shield myself from my family's inevitable judgment. M.L. Blackwood was born in that freezing hospital room forged in the fires of unimaginable grief. After the funeral, while my family paraded their fake wealth on social media, and Derek built his new life with his mistress, I embraced the silent hustle. I sent out endless query letters to literary agents while feeding Mason, Lily, and Noah cheap macaroni and cheese at our scratched kitchen table. I edited chapters late at night after shifting sleeping children from my bed to theirs, my eyes burning with exhaustion. When a top-tier agent finally called with a major publishing deal, I did not celebrate. I just nodded, signed the contract, and went right back to driving my rattling, rust-covered minivan to the local discount grocery store. Then the book launched. It did not just do well, it exploded. Word of mouth spread like wildfire across the internet. The dark, gripping narrative resonated with millions of readers who could feel the genuine pain bleeding through the pages. Within 3 weeks, my thriller shot straight to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there month after month. The royalty checks began pouring in, accumulating into massive deposits that seemed almost surreal whenever I checked my banking app. Yet my daily reality remained completely unchanged. I wore faded sweatpants and patched winter coats. I lived in my cramped, drafty house, fixing leaky faucets with duct tape and mowing my own lawn. I let Derek drag me into family court and paint me as a starving, pathetic ghostwriter because keeping up the facade of a broken woman was my ultimate shield. My family and my ex-husband fed on a superiority complex. As long as they believed I was completely beneath them, they ignored me. Their supreme arrogance was my absolute best camouflage. I was quietly amassing a fortune while they drowned in their own superficial debt. Every time Caroline posted a photo of a new designer handbag, I looked at my bank balance and smiled. I was playing a long, quiet game of chess while they were busy playing dress-up. The ultimate turning point happened on a mundane Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my kitchen eating generic brand cereal and making a grocery list when my phone rang. It was my literary agent, and she sounded completely breathless. I answered, expecting a routine update on international translation rights. Instead, she delivered news that made my coffee cup slip from my fingers and shatter on the linoleum floor. "Madeline," she gasped, her voice shaking with raw adrenaline. "Are you sitting down? Netflix just made an official offer for the exclusive film and television adaptation rights to the book." I stood frozen, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. I asked her what the exact offer was. She paused, letting the silence hang for a split second before dropping the hammer. "It is an 8-figure deal, Madeline. Guaranteed production. You are about to become incredibly wealthy." My mind went entirely blank. Tens of millions of dollars were about to be wired into my name. The sheer scale of the money was staggering, but my immediate reaction was not joy. It was sheer unadulterated panic. If a deposit of that magnitude hit a standard bank account attached to my legal name, the digital footprint would be massive and impossible to hide. Derek was legally obligated to provide financial disclosures annually for his child support evasion tactics, and he had ruthless lawyers who routinely scoured databases looking for any excuse to attack me. If my parents found out, they would launch frivolous lawsuits claiming emotional distress or demanding compensation for the pathetic crumbs they threw at me during my childhood. The secret was simply too big to hide in a personal checking account anymore. I needed an impenetrable fortress. I needed corporate lawyers, offshore trusts, and a legal entity that could act as a ghost in the financial system. If Derek or Brenda caught even a whisper of this Netflix deal, they would descend on my home like vultures, dragging me through years of agonizing litigation just to drain my resources. I told my agent to stall the streaming network executives for exactly 48 hours. I hung up the phone, grabbed my keys, and walked out to my battered minivan. I had to set up a corporate entity, and I had to do it immediately. I had to do it immediately. I bypassed my local neighborhood completely and drove my rattling minivan straight into the heart of the downtown financial district. The towering glass skyscrapers reflected the cold gray sky, intimidating monuments to wealth and power. I parked in a subterranean garage, ignoring the luxury sedans surrounding my beat-up vehicle, and rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. The reception area of the law firm was dripping with quiet money. Polished mahogany, genuine leather, and absolute silence. The receptionist eyed my faded sweater with a tight professional smile that barely concealed her judgment. I did not care. I demanded an emergency consultation with their top asset protection attorney. Victor was a sharp, calculating man who looked like he billed by the second. When I sat across his massive desk, he laced his fingers together and asked how he could assist someone with my specific financial profile. He was being polite, but I knew he saw a frantic, broke single mother. I did not waste time explaining my wardrobe. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket, logged into my author portal, and slid the device across the polished wood. I showed him the certified contract offer from the streaming network, completely unredacted, featuring an 8-figure payout. Victor stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His posture immediately shifted from dismissive to hyper-focused. The condescension vanished, replaced by the sharp instincts of a legal predator who had just spotted a massive kill. "I need an absolute ghost in the financial system," I told him, leaning forward. "I have an ex-husband who would rather see our children starve than pay a dime of support, and a family of social climbing narcissists who abandoned my dying son. The second this money hits a bank, they will smell it. They will drag me through family court file, frivolous, emotional distress lawsuits, and try to bleed me dry through endless litigation. I need to be entirely invisible." Victor nodded, a cold smile forming on his lips. He understood the assignment perfectly. He introduced me to the impenetrable fortress known as a Delaware Limited Liability Company. "Delaware law is unique," he explained, mapping out the strategy on a legal pad. "It allows for complete and total anonymity. Your name will not appear on any public registry, state database, or corporate filing. We will use a registered agent service to act as the public face. To the outside world, this company is a blank wall." We named it M Holdings. Within 24 hours, Victor had established the corporate entity and drafted the airtight documentation necessary to transfer all my intellectual property, including my best-selling thriller, directly into the company's ownership. He set up a complex web of corporate trusts, ensuring that the wealth flowing from my book sales and the streaming deal would be legally partitioned away from my personal identity. Victor reviewed my divorce decree with microscopic precision. Because Derek had eagerly signed away his parental rights and finalized our divorce before the book was officially picked up by the publisher, he had absolutely zero legal standing to claim any of my royalties as a marital asset. He had severed his ties to save a few $1,000s in child support, unwittingly locking himself out of a multi-million-dollar empire. It was poetic justice written in legal ink. A week later, the paperwork was finalized. I signed the streaming network contract as the anonymous chairman of M Holdings. When the massive 8-figure wire transfer cleared, it bypassed my personal checking account entirely and flowed directly into the heavily guarded corporate trust. I was now a multimillionaire, but if anyone searched my personal records, I was still just Madeline, the struggling freelance writer barely making ends meet. With the legal shield firmly in place, it was time to put that immense wealth to work. Victor introduced me to Donovan, a ruthless and highly connected wealth manager who specialized in aggressive acquisitions. Sitting in a private conference room, Donovan handed me a thick portfolio filled with conservative investment strategies. He talked about municipal bonds, index funds, and safe, slow-growth mutual accounts. I slid his portfolio back across the table. "I am not interested in playing it safe, Donovan," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I do not want passive income. I want leverage. I want power." Donovan paused, closing his folder. "What kind of leverage are we talking about?" I reached into my worn canvas tote bag and pulled out 2 separate manila folders, placing them squarely in front of him. "I want M Holdings to move into predatory real estate debt acquisition," I instructed. "Specifically, I want you to acquire the mortgages for the properties listed in these files." Donovan opened the first folder. It contained detailed property records, zoning information, and mortgage histories for a sprawling suburban mansion. It was Brenda and Gregory's pristine estate, the very house where they hosted their lavish yacht club friends, the home they prized above their own grandson's life. They had remortgaged it twice to maintain their fake debt-fueled lifestyle. He opened the second folder. This one contained the commercial deed and leasing agreements for a massive high-end corporate office building downtown. It was the exact building where Derek served as a regional sales director, strutting around the glass lobby as if he owned the world. "Buy their debt from the banks," I told Donovan, staring him dead in the eye. "Offer the banks a premium if you have to. Pay whatever it takes to secure those specific mortgages and commercial deeds. I want to own the literal ground they walk on. And you must ensure they never ever find out that M Holdings is their new landlord." Donovan looked from the files to me, a sharp, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Consider it done, Madam Chairman." Donovan leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Consider it done, Madam Chairman." The execution was swift and utterly silent. Within weeks, M Holdings, a faceless corporate entity registered in Delaware, began its aggressive acquisitions. Donovan targeted the regional bank that held the mortgage on my parents' sprawling suburban mansion. The bank was struggling desperate to offload high-risk debt to shore up their balance sheets. My parents had remortgaged their home twice to maintain their country club lifestyle, making their loan incredibly toxic. Donovan swooped in, offering a premium cash buyout that the bank executives practically salivated over. The paperwork was signed, the wire transfer cleared, and the deed was transferred to M Holdings. My parents had absolutely no idea. They continued hosting their lavish dinner parties, posting photos of their manicured lawns and crystal chandeliers, completely oblivious to the fact that the daughter they had discarded was now their legal landlord. Next, Donovan set his sights on the commercial real estate market. The towering glass and steel office building where Derek served as the regional sales director was owned by a mid-sized property management firm facing a liquidity crisis. Donovan aggressively outbid two rival firms, acquiring the entire property portfolio. The psychological satisfaction was intoxicating. I would drop Mason, Lily, and Noah off at school in my battered minivan wearing my faded sweatpants, and then intentionally drive past my parents' pristine estate. I would idle at the stop sign watching Gregory meticulously prune his rose bushes, knowing that with a single signature, I could legally evict him from the property he prized above his own grandson's life. I would drive downtown and park across the street from Derek's office building. I would watch him strut through the revolving glass doors in his tailored suits, barking orders into his phone, acting like he was a titan of industry. He thought he had ruined me financially. He thought I was a starving ghostwriter barely scraping by in a cramped house. He had no idea that every time he stepped into that lobby, he was walking on floors I owned. Every time he rode the elevator, he was utilizing my assets. The sheer arrogance of my family was their greatest vulnerability. Their belief that I was beneath them provided the perfect camouflage for my empire. For nearly a year, I maintained the facade perfectly. My thriller continued to dominate the bestseller lists, and the Netflix production entered its final stages of filming. The royalty checks grew larger, flowing directly into my corporate trusts. I hired a private tutor for my children, explaining it away as a community outreach program, ensuring they received the best education possible without raising suspicion. I continued shopping at discount grocery stores, driving my minivan, and playing the role of the defeated ex-wife to absolute perfection. The economy, however, was not as stable as my carefully constructed life. Rumors of a looming recession began dominating the financial news networks. Interest rates climbed, tech stocks plummeted, and the unregulated high-risk cryptocurrency markets began experiencing terrifying volatility. I was sitting in my modest kitchen helping Lily with her math homework when my secure phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed Donovan's name. I excused myself, walking into the hallway and locking the door behind me. "Madam Chairman," Donovan said, his voice crackling with barely contained excitement. "The dominoes are starting to fall. The market just took a massive hit." "Which market?" I asked, my heart rate accelerating. "The crypto sector," Donovan replied. "Specifically, the decentralized exchange platform that your brother-in-law Jamal has been heavily leveraging. It just collapsed entirely. The federal government has frozen the platform's assets pending an investigation into massive liquidity issues and potential wire fraud." I closed my eyes, a fierce, predatory thrill surging through my veins. Jamal had built his entire identity on being a crypto genius. He had flaunted his supposed wealth, belittled my modest lifestyle, and most unforgivably used my dead son's face to fund his fraudulent investments. "How bad is the exposure?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Catastrophic," Donovan said. Jamal wasn't just an investor. He was acting as an unlicensed broker. He convinced his entire social circle, including your parents, to buy into the scheme. The IRS has officially issued a massive tax lien against him. They are moving to freeze all of his personal assets, including Caroline's leased vehicles. The Golden Child's empire was imploding in real time. Caroline, who had popped champagne on a yacht while I stood in the rain at Leo's funeral, was about to face the brutal reality of federal asset forfeiture. "And my parents?" I asked. "They co-signed several of Jamal's high-interest business loans to maintain their social standing," Donovan explained. With Jamal's accounts frozen, the creditors are going to aggressively target your parents for the outstanding debt. They are going to default Madeline. It is inevitable. I looked at the framed photo of Leo sitting on my hallway table, the sweet, brave boy who had died while his grandparents partied. The time for silent observation was over. The execution was about to begin. The time for silent observation was over. The execution was about to begin. I did not have to lift a single finger to start the avalanche. I simply sat back in my modest living room sipping a hot cup of tea and read the daily updates from the private investigator my wealth manager had retained. Reading those detailed reports was more satisfying than any bestseller I had ever written. The implosion started precisely at 2 in the morning on a freezing Tuesday. Caroline and Jamal were asleep in their sprawling, least modern estate. The heavy rumble of diesel engines shattered the quiet of their exclusive gated community. Two heavy-duty tow trucks backed into their driveway, their amber lights flashing brightly against the dark exterior of the house. According to the report, Jamal sprinted out the front door in his silk bathrobe, shouting at the repo men. He waved his phone, threatening to call his lawyers, screaming about his constitutional rights and his crypto portfolio. The lead repo man simply handed Jamal a thick stack of federal paperwork. The Internal Revenue Service had officially dropped the hammer. Jamal was hit with a massive multi-million-dollar tax lien for operating an unlicensed financial brokerage and failing to report his phantom cryptocurrency gains. The government had frozen every single bank account attached to his name. Caroline ran out into the freezing night air, barefoot and hysterical. She shrieked as the tow operators hitched up her pristine white Range Rover and Jamal's customized imported sports car. For a woman whose entire self-worth was tied to her social media presence, this was the ultimate nightmare. Lights flicked on in the neighboring houses. People stepped onto their porches, holding their phones up to record the spectacular downfall of the neighborhood's most arrogant couple. Caroline begged the men to stop sobbing, that there had to be a mistake. But the trucks drove away, leaving the golden child standing in an empty driveway with absolutely nothing. But Jamal's financial crater did not just swallow his own household. It dragged my parents right down into the abyss with him. The very next afternoon, Brenda was enjoying a lavish lunch with her country club friends at an upscale bistro downtown. When the waiter brought the bill, she handed over her premium platinum credit card with her usual haughty flourish. The waiter returned 2 minutes later, leaning in discreetly to inform her that the card had been declined. Brenda, insulted and furious, handed over a second card. Declined. She handed over a third. Declined. She was forced to call Gregory humiliated in front of the very women she spent her life trying to impress. What Brenda did not know was that Gregory was currently sitting in his home office, staring at a stack of final demand notices. To fund his fraudulent crypto ventures, Jamal had needed capital. Because Jamal's actual credit history was a mess of leveraged digital assets, he had convinced my parents to co-sign a series of massive high-interest business loans. Gregory and Brenda, desperate to maintain the illusion of having a wealthy tech genius son-in-law, had eagerly signed the paperwork, putting their own pristine credit on the line. Now that the federal government had frozen Jamal's assets, the aggressive commercial creditors instantly turned their crosshairs on the co-signers. The banks had frozen Gregory and Brenda's liquid assets overnight. The panic inside the pristine suburban mansion was suffocating. Gregory paced the hardwood floors, screaming at Jamal over the phone, demanding to know where the money had gone. Brenda locked herself in her bedroom, hyperventilating as the terrifying reality set in. They had completely leveraged their comfortable retirement to fund Caroline's fake luxury lifestyle, and now the bill had come due. While my parents and my sister were drowning in the sudden violent collapse of their finances, the final piece of my vengeance was quietly falling into place across town. Derek had always believed he was untouchable. As the regional sales director of a major corporation, he walked through his downtown office building like a king. He spent his days barking orders at subordinates and his nights treating his new wife to expensive dinners paid for with a seemingly endless supply of cash. He did not know that his corporate office building had recently been acquired by M Holdings, And he certainly did not know that the aggressive new ownership had mandated a ruthless forensic financial audit of all major commercial tenants to ensure lease compliance. My wealth manager had specifically flagged Derek's department for the corporate auditors. It took them less than 48 hours to uncover the truth. Derek was not a brilliant salesman. He was a thief. The auditors discovered a glaring trail of fraudulent expense reports, fabricated client dinners, and bloated travel budgets. Derek had been systematically embezzling corporate funds for over 2 years to finance his lavish lifestyle and woo his former mistress, who was now his legally wedded wife. He had been stealing from his employers while simultaneously dragging me into family court, claiming he was too broke to afford basic child support for Mason, Lily, and Noah. The climax of his arrogance arrived on a Thursday morning. Derek stepped out of the elevator on the top floor, holding his expensive coffee ready to rule his department. Instead, he was met by the Vice President of Human Resources, 2 corporate lawyers, and a pair of uniformed security guards. They did not give him a chance to explain. They did not let him return to his desk. Right in the middle of the open plan office in front of dozens of his employees and colleagues, the Human Resources Director loudly informed Derek that his employment was terminated immediately for gross financial misconduct. Derek tried to argue, his face turning a mottled, furious red. He threatened to sue for wrongful termination, boasting about his sales records. The corporate lawyers simply handed him a thick binder containing every single falsified receipt and fraudulent wire transfer he had ever authorized. They informed him that the company was not just firing him. They were handing the entire dossier over to the local district attorney for criminal prosecution. Security guards flanked him, gripping his arms firmly. They escorted him to the freight elevator, stripping him of his corporate badge and his dignity. The entire office watched in stunned silence as the arrogant director was marched out like a common criminal. Derek stood on the freezing sidewalk outside the towering glass building, holding a small cardboard box containing a few personal items. His prestigious career was obliterated. He was facing potential jail time. And soon, his new wife would discover that the wealthy, successful man she had married was actually a broke, unemployed fraud facing a criminal indictment. Everything was falling apart simultaneously for the people who had abandoned Leo. The walls were closing in and they were running out of air. But the ultimate destruction was still waiting in the wings, because Thanksgiving was just around the corner and they were about to come knocking on my door. The heavy oak front door of Brenda and Gregory's mansion slammed shut behind the mail carrier. Brenda picked up the thick certified envelope from the marble entryway table. She was expecting an invitation to the annual charity gala, a staple of their social calendar. Instead, the return address read, M. Holdings LLC, Delaware. Her perfectly manicured fingers broke the seal, and as she pulled out the stack of legal documents, her face drained of color. The bold black letters at the top of the page screamed, Notice of Default and Impending Foreclosure. Gregory, sitting in his mahogany-paneled study, heard Brenda's sharp gasp. He rushed into the foyer to find his wife leaning against the wall, clutching the papers as if they were venomous. He snatched them from her hands, his eyes darting across the legal jargon. M. Holdings had aggressively purchased their toxic high-interest mortgage debt from the regional bank and was now calling in the entire balance immediately. Because of the default clauses tied to Jamal's imploded loans, the demand was swift and unforgiving. They had exactly 30 days to produce the full amount or vacate the premises. This is impossible! Gregory bellowed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. We have an impeccable payment history with the bank. They can't just sell our debt to some faceless corporate entity and demand payment in full. It says here we defaulted when Jamal's assets were seized, Brenda whimpered, pointing a trembling finger at the second page. The cross-collateralization clause. Gregory, what are we going to do? We don't have that kind of liquidity. Panic, raw and suffocating, set in. Gregory immediately mobilized, relying on the strategy that had always worked for them, calling in favors from their affluent social circle. He locked himself in his study, dialing numbers of golf buddies, country club executives, and business associates. He pitched it as a temporary cash flow issue, a minor inconvenience that required a short-term, high-yield loan. The responses were universally cold. Word of Jamal's spectacular federal takedown had already ripped through their exclusive community. In their world, financial ruin was worse than a plague. It was a stain that no one wanted to touch. "I'm sorry, Gregory," one particularly wealthy associate said over the phone, his tone clipped. "My portfolio is completely tied up right now. Perhaps you should look into downsizing. I hear the market for distressed properties is quite active." The line went dead. Brenda's experience was equally devastating. She called the president of her bridge club hoping to secure a quiet private loan to save their home. The president, a woman Brenda had hosted for lavish dinners just weeks prior, was devastatingly blunt. "Brenda, darling, we simply can't associate with this kind of scandal. Federal wire fraud, asset seizure. It's completely unacceptable. I think it's best if you step down from the club's board immediately." The isolation was total. The friends they had bought with expensive wine and extravagant parties vanished into the ether. Their credit lines were slashed to zero, and the bank accounts they had managed to keep open were heavily monitored due to the IRS lien connected to Jamal. The 30 days evaporated with terrifying speed. Legal appeals were rejected and requests for extensions were met with deafening silence from M Holdings. On the final day, the reality of their situation crashed down upon them. They were packing designer clothes into expensive luggage surrounded by moving boxes they couldn't afford to fill. The grand house felt cold and empty, stripped of its illusions. Caroline and Jamal arrived later that afternoon hauling their own suitcases. They had been officially evicted from their leased estate. Jamal looked completely broken, pacing the foyer and furiously texting his rapidly dwindling legal team. Caroline was a shell of her former self, wearing sweatpants and looking as if she hadn't slept in weeks. "Where are we supposed to go?" Caroline demanded, her voice shrill with anxiety. "The hotels won't take our cards, and Jamal's accounts are still frozen." Gregory stood in the center of the grand foyer, surrounded by the remnants of his shattered empire. He looked at his wife, his daughter, and his disgraced son-in-law. The arrogance that usually puffed out his chest was gone, replaced by a desperate feral instinct for survival. "We still have family," Gregory said slowly, the gears in his head turning. Brenda looked up from her packing confusion, etching deep lines into her face. "Family who my sister hasn't spoken to me in a decade, and your brother is living in a retirement community." "Not them," Gregory said, a familiar, entitled sharpness returning to his voice. "Madeline." Caroline scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Madeline, are you serious? She lives in that cramped little shack across town. She's a broke freelance writer. How is she supposed to help us? She has a roof over her head, doesn't she?" Gregory countered, his tone, brokering no argument. "We provided for her for 18 years. We raised her. She owes us. We'll just stay with her until Jamal's lawyers clear this up and I secure a new loan. It's only temporary." Brenda hesitated, the memory of their last interaction with Madeline, the day they abandoned her in the hospital and tried to steal the GoFundMe money, flashing in her mind. But desperation easily overwrote guilt. "It will be tight," Brenda reasoned, convincing herself. "But she is family. She can put those kids in one room and Caroline and Jamal can have the master suite. It's the least she can do after everything we've been through." Gregory nodded, grabbing his overcoat. "Exactly. She's probably desperate for the company anyway. Pack the cars. We're going to Madeline's." They loaded their designer luggage into Gregory's remaining vehicle, leaving the keys to the mansion on the marble table. They drove away from the wreckage of their lives, heading straight toward the daughter they had discarded, entirely unaware that they were walking directly into the center of the web she had spun. While Brenda and Gregory were driving away from the wreckage of their lives, heading straight toward the daughter they had discarded, entirely unaware that they were walking directly into the center of the web she had spun, another spectacular collapse was unfolding across town. Derek was having a fantastic morning. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, sipping an expensive artisanal espresso, admiring the sprawling downtown skyline. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored Italian suit, feeling absolutely untouchable. He had successfully bullied his ex-wife into a pathetic child support arrangement, saving himself thousands of dollars a month. His new wife, Courtney, was currently shopping for imported marble countertops for their luxury penthouse. Life, as far as Derek was concerned, was perfect. A sharp rap on his glass door shattered his concentration. Derek turned, expecting his assistant with the morning sales reports. Instead, the vice president of human resources marched into his office flanked by two corporate attorneys and a pair of burly uniformed security guards. Derek frowned, setting his espresso on his mahogany desk. "What is this about?" The HR executive did not offer a polite greeting. She dropped a massive red binder squarely onto his desk. The loud thud made Derek jump. "We received an emergency mandate from the new ownership group of this commercial building," she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. "They initiated a ruthless forensic audit of all high-level tenants to ensure compliance. Your department was flagged." Derek scoffed, crossing his arms to project authority. "I run the most profitable sales division in this company. If the new landlord has a problem with my paperwork, they can take it up with my legal team." One of the corporate attorneys stepped forward, opening the red binder. "You do not have a legal team, Derek, and you no longer have a job." The audit uncovered a highly sophisticated 2-year embezzlement operation. "You have been systematically fabricating client dinners, inflating travel budgets, and routing corporate funds into a series of offshore accounts. You stole over $400,000 from this company." The blood drained completely from Derek's face. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. He opened his mouth to deny it, to spin a web of lies like he always did, but the attorney cut him off. "Do not bother speaking," the attorney warned. "We have the wire transfers, the falsified receipts, and the IP addresses. Your employment is terminated immediately for gross financial misconduct. We are legally obligated to hand this entire dossier over to the district attorney. You are facing serious federal charges." Derek was paralyzed. The security guards moved in quickly, grabbing him by the arms. They did not let him collect his personalized golf putter or his framed photographs. They marched him out of his corner office, dragging him right through the center of the open-plan sales floor. Dozens of his employees, the very people he had tormented and belittled for years, stopped typing and stared. Silence swept across the room. Derek tried to hold his head high, but the humiliation was absolute. He was shoved into the freight elevator like a bag of trash and deposited onto the freezing concrete sidewalk outside, stripped of his badge, his career, and his dignity. Panicking, Derek hailed a rideshare to his luxury penthouse. He needed Courtney. He needed to transfer whatever cash they had left before the corporate lawyers froze his accounts. He burst through the front door of their condo, shouting her name. The silence that answered him was deafening. Derek ran into the master bedroom. Courtney's massive walk-in closet was completely bare, her designer shoes, her expensive dresses all gone. On the kitchen island, resting next to a set of keys, was a single sheet of paper. It was a formal notice of separation drafted by her divorce attorney. Courtney had seen the warning signs. The moment the corporate auditors had called her earlier that morning to verify certain suspicious spousal expense reports, she knew the ship was sinking. She had immediately gutted their joint checking and savings accounts, legally taking exactly half of everything they owned before fleeing to her mother's house. Derek fell to his knees in his empty, echoing kitchen. He was entirely broke. He was facing federal prison. The life he had built by stepping on others was gone. He spent the next 3 nights in a cheap, rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, drinking cheap liquor and staring at the peeling wallpaper. His mind raced with frantic, desperate thoughts. He needed a lifeline. He needed cash to hire a criminal defense attorney. His thoughts drifted to Madeline. He replayed the day in family court over and over in his head. She had given up the child support money way too easily. She had agreed to take on the massive financial burden of raising 3 growing children without a fight. A woman who was supposedly a starving freelance writer would have begged for every single penny. Madeline was smart. She was calculating. Derek realized with a sudden sickening clarity that she had played him. She had to be hiding money. Driven by pure malice and desperation, Derek took the last remaining limit on his final credit card and hired a shady, aggressive private investigator. He met the investigator in the dimly lit parking lot of a local diner, handing over a folder with Madeline's basic information. "I want you to dig into every digital footprint she has," Derek ordered, his voice raw and raspy. "She is a writer. She claims she makes nothing. I think she is hiding income in shell companies or offshore accounts. Find the money and I will pay you double your rate when I sue her for it." The investigator nodded, taking the file. "Give me 48 hours." 2 days later, Derek sat in a sticky booth inside the same diner, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. The investigator slid into the booth across from him, tossing a thin manila envelope onto the table. "Your ex-wife is good," the investigator said, ordering a black coffee. "She is buried behind corporate trusts and a Delaware entity that is basically a black hole. I could not pierce the corporate veil. But she made one tiny mistake." Derek leaned forward, his eyes hungry. "What mistake?" The investigator opened the envelope. "She used her home internet protocol address to file a copyright registration 2 years ago. I tracked the routing number. The copyright was filed under a pseudonym, M.L. Blackwood." Derek frowned. "Who is M.L. Blackwood?" The investigator pulled out a printed article from a prominent entertainment magazine and slid it across the table. "Read it yourself." Derek picked up the paper. The headline practically screamed at him. "Best-selling thriller author, M.L. Blackwood Inc.'s 8-figure movie deal with streaming giant." The article detailed how the book had spent months at the top of the charts generating millions in royalties before the massive adaptation buyout. Derek's breath hitched. He read the publication timeline. He looked at the copyright date. He did the math in his head. Madeline had written the book while they were still legally married. She had drafted a multi-million-dollar property while sitting next to their dying son, and she had hidden it from the divorce proceedings. A slow, wicked, terrifying smile spread across Derek's face. He was not going to jail. He was going to be rich. Under state law, anything created during the marriage was considered a joint marital asset. Madeline owed him exactly 50% of her entire empire. He tapped his fingers on the diner table, envisioning the look of sheer terror on her face when he showed up to claim his fortune. He thought he had just hit the ultimate jackpot. He had no idea he was walking right into a trap. He thought he had just hit the ultimate jackpot. He had no idea he was walking right into a trap. Miles away from Derek's delusion of grandeur, a fierce winter storm was descending upon the city. It was Thanksgiving evening. The wind howled furiously outside, rattling the window panes and sending dead leaves skittering across the frozen pavement. But inside my home, the atmosphere was a sanctuary of absolute warmth and perfect peace. A fire crackled merrily in the brick hearth, casting a soft golden glow across the living room walls. The rich, savory aroma of roasted turkey, fresh rosemary, and melted butter filled every corner of the house. I stood at the kitchen island wearing a comfortable knitted sweater, carefully basting the holiday bird. In the living room, Mason, Lily, and Noah were sprawled across the plush area rug, laughing uproariously as they played a competitive game of Monopoly. I paused for a moment, simply watching them. Their faces were bright and healthy, their eyes crinkling with genuine joy. We had survived the darkest chapter of our lives. We had endured the agonizing loss of Leo and the crushing betrayal of the people who were supposed to protect us. I had built this safe haven for them with my own 2 hands, and I promised myself that no one would ever be allowed to shatter our peace again. Suddenly, the tranquil harmony of our Thanksgiving evening was violently interrupted. A loud, aggressive pounding echoed through the hallway. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was a frantic, entitled hammering, the sound of people who believed the world owed them an immediate response. The heavy thud startled the children, causing Noah to drop his game pieces. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, my heart rate remaining entirely steady. I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I walked over to the security camera monitor resting on my kitchen counter. The digital screen illuminated the freezing front porch. Standing there shivering violently against the biting wind were Brenda, Gregory, Caroline, and Jamal. They were surrounded by a haphazard pile of oversized designer suitcases. Their faces were pinched with the severe cold and sheer undisguised panic. The bank had officially locked them out of their sprawling mansion, and Jamal's least modern estate had been seized by federal authorities. With their credit utterly obliterated and their wealthy friends refusing to answer their desperate calls, they had nowhere else to turn. They had come to demand shelter from the very daughter they had abandoned and discarded like garbage. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open. The freezing November wind whipped through the entryway, instantly chilling the warm air of the house. Brenda pushed past me immediately, not offering a greeting, not waiting for an invitation. She stomped her expensive leather boots on my welcome mat, her teeth chattering loudly as she dragged a massive Louis Vuitton suitcase behind her. Gregory followed close behind his face, a mottled angry red from the biting cold, muttering curses under his breath about the horrific holiday traffic. Caroline and Jamal trailed at the rear, looking completely miserable and entirely out of their element. Jamal glared at the modest exterior of my home, shaking his head in blatant disgust as he hauled 2 heavy bags over the threshold. The wheels of their expensive luggage scraped loudly against my hardwood floors. I calmly closed the door, blocking out the howling storm. I stood in my hallway, crossing my arms, my expression completely neutral as I watched the invaders take over my space. "It is freezing out there," Brenda snapped, rubbing her arms vigorously to generate heat. "Madeline, go tell Mason, Lily, and Noah to pack their things into the guest room right now. Caroline and Jamal need the master suite. They have been through a terrible ordeal today, and they need their privacy. Your father and I will take the boys' room." Caroline dropped her designer handbag onto my entryway table, letting out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh. "This house is so incredibly small, Madeline. It smells like roasted garlic and cheap air freshener. But I guess we can make it work for a few weeks until Jamal's lawyers sort out this ridiculous misunderstanding with the federal government." I remained perfectly still, absorbing the sheer breathtaking audacity of these people. They had abandoned my son as he lay dying in a sterile hospital bed. They had tried to steal money using his tragic hospital photos. They had treated me like absolute garbage for my entire existence. Now, completely stripped of their wealth, their status, and their fake friends, they marched into my home and started barking orders as if I were the hired help. Gregory stepped forward, automatically adopting his usual pompous, authoritative posture. He adjusted his wrinkled collar desperately, trying to look like the powerful patriarch he used to be. "Now, Madeline, I know we have had our differences in the past." He began utilizing that deeply condescending tone I knew so well. "But family sticks together in times of crisis. We are the victims of a ruthless, faceless corporate entity today. Some predatory company aggressively pushed through a foreclosure on our home. They gave us absolutely no warning. We were thrown out into the cold. You owe us your support." Jamal scoffed loudly from the living room doorway, pacing like a caged animal. "The whole system is rigged against independent investors like me. The Feds seized my platforms just because they do not understand decentralized finance. But my legal team is going to destroy them in court. I just need a quiet place to operate from while I restructure my digital assets." "Do you even have high-speed internet here, or is it as basic as the rest of this place?" I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. The woman who used to cower under their relentless judgment was dead and buried. I turned away from them and walked slowly to the kitchen island. I picked up a delicate crystal wine glass and reached for an expensive bottle of deep, full-bodied red wine. I poured a generous amount, the dark liquid splashing elegantly against the glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the complex flavors on my tongue. I looked at the 4 of them standing in my hallway, stripped of their power, stripped of their money, relying entirely on the daughter they had thrown away. I set the glass down and turned to my 3 beautiful children, who were watching the commotion with wide, anxious eyes. "Mason, Lily, Noah," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and reassuring. "Gather up your board games and take them upstairs to my bedroom. Close the door tightly and turn on a movie. Do not come downstairs until I come up to get you. Mommy has some adult business to handle." They nodded obediently, scooped up their game pieces, and hurried up the wooden staircase. I waited until I heard the distinct click of my heavy bedroom door shutting securely behind them. Then I picked up my wine glass, smiled a warm, chilling smile, and turned back to face my uninvited guests. The execution was about to begin. I stepped away from the staircase, my wine glass cool against my palm, and gestured toward the living room. "Why do you not all go sit down?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "It seems we have a lot to discuss." Brenda scoffed, but immediately marched toward the sofa, brushing imaginary dust off the cushions before sitting down. She looked around at my simple, cozy decor with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Gregory followed, claiming my favorite armchair as if it were a throne built specifically for him. He unbuttoned his expensive, though slightly rumpled overcoat and leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. He was preparing to hold court, entirely oblivious to the fact that his kingdom had already burned to the ground. Now Madeline Gregory began, his voice dripping with that familiar patronizing authority. I know we have not seen eye to eye recently. You have always been the difficult child, always holding on to petty grievances and playing the victim. But tonight is Thanksgiving. Tonight is about family, and family above all else sticks together when the outside world turns vicious. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting him dig his own grave. Vicious is an interesting word, Dad, I replied neutrally. He nodded emphatically, misinterpreting my calmness for submission. Exactly. We have been targeted by a faceless, predatory corporate machine. A shadowy syndicate called M Holdings bought out the mortgage on our estate and ruthlessly pushed through a foreclosure. They gave us no warning, no opportunity to negotiate. They simply kicked us out into the freezing street. It is corporate greed at its absolute worst. So as your father, I am telling you that it is your duty to house us until I can leverage my contacts and crush this M Holdings in court. We raised you. We fed you. We put clothes on your back for 18 years. It is time you paid us back for everything we provided. Consider this your chance to finally do something right for this family. Before I could respond to that breathtaking level of delusion, Jamal groaned loudly. He was pacing the length of my modest living room, his designer sneakers squeaking annoyingly against the hardwood floor. He looked at my simple, comfortable furniture with pure disdain, as if being in my house was a physical punishment. How do you even breathe in a place this tiny? Jamal complained, crossing his arms over his chest. The ceilings are incredibly low and there is barely any natural light. My home gym was bigger than this entire floor plan. Look, Madeline, I am dealing with a massive federal misunderstanding right now. The government froze my crypto assets because they are terrified of digital innovation. The IRS is full of dinosaurs who do not understand blockchain infrastructure. I am going to be on the phone with my legal team all night trying to sort out this massive overreach. I need absolute silence, and I need you to fix us plates from whatever you are cooking in that kitchen. I need premium protein to strategize. Do not give me any dry turkey and make sure you pour me a glass of whatever you are drinking. Caroline let out a dramatic, breathless sigh, dropping her exhausted frame next to Brenda on the sofa. She kicked off her high heels and boldly propped her bare feet right onto my coffee table. Honestly, Madeline, you should be thanking us, Caroline said, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. Your holidays are always so depressing and lonely. Just you and those kids in this gloomy little house. Having us here is going to totally liven up your Thanksgiving. We bring a certain energy that you completely lack. I mean, my life has been a whirlwind of yacht parties and exclusive galas, and now I am stuck here. So you should be grateful we are here to provide some excitement. Just make sure you wash the sheets in the master bedroom with hot water. My skin is incredibly sensitive to cheap detergent, and I refuse to sleep on anything less than perfectly sanitized linens. I stood at the head of the coffee table, looking down at the four of them. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from them was almost cinematic. They had lost their mansions, their luxury cars, and their pristine reputations. They were currently running from federal investigators and commercial creditors. Jamal was drowning in tax liens, and my parents were utterly bankrupt because they had foolishly co-signed his fraudulent business loans. Yet their supreme, intoxicating arrogance remained entirely intact. They honestly believed I was still the weak, pathetic ghostwriter they could walk all over. They believed they could waltz into my safe haven, insult my home, demand my food, and claim my bedroom. They thought they were the victims of a cruel, unfair world, completely blind to the fact that their own greed had engineered their destruction. They demanded loyalty after abandoning Leo in the pediatric intensive care unit. They demanded shelter after trying to steal $150,000 using photos of my dying child. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not point out the sheer nauseating hypocrisy of Gregory demanding family loyalty. I simply smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm, absolute smile. I set my wineglass down on the edge of the coffee table. I turned around and walked unhurriedly into my adjacent home office, leaving the door wide open so they could see my every move. I walked around to the back of my heavy oak desk. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside sat a thick, heavy manila folder. The emblem of my Delaware Limited Liability Company was embossed on the front cover in sharp black ink. I picked it up, feeling the immense crushing weight of the legal power it contained. It was the weapon I had forged in the darkest nights of my grief. I walked back into the living room. Gregory was already complaining to Brenda about the lack of high-end liquor in my house. Caroline was loudly demanding that Jamal check his phone for updates from his non-existent lawyers. I stood at the head of the coffee table and dropped the thick manila folder right in the center. The heavy, authoritative thud made all four of them jump in their seats and look up at me. I looked directly into my father's eyes, letting the silence stretch for one agonizing second. "It is funny you mention M. Holdings, Dad." Gregory stared at me, his thick eyebrows knitting together in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its pompous edge. "Do not try to change the subject with riddles, Madeline. We are talking about our home and the ruthless syndicate that stole it from us." I reached forward and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover of the manila folder. The very first document rested right on top, printed on thick legal paper. It was the official foreclosure deed for their pristine suburban mansion. The dark ink of the bank transfer authorization and the raised seal of the county clerk were impossible to miss. I slid the paper directly across the coffee table until it touched his fingertips. "Read the line designating the purchasing entity," I instructed, my voice echoing in the sudden heavy silence of the living room. Gregory picked up the document. Brenda leaned over his shoulder, her eyes squinting at the dense legal jargon. He read the line aloud, his voice wavering slightly. "M. Holdings, LLC, a Delaware Limited Liability Company." Then his eyes drifted lower to the signature line denoting the authorizing chairman and sole controlling owner. He stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. The arrogant patriarch who had just demanded I cook him a premium dinner was suddenly gasping for air, his hands trembling violently as the paper rattled in his grip. "This is a fake," Brenda stammered, pointing a manicured finger at the document. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "This is some kind of sick, twisted joke. You do not have the money to buy a coffee franchise, let alone our multi-million-dollar estate. You are a broke freelance writer." "It is not a joke, Mom," I said, savoring the absolute horror blossoming in their eyes. "I am the sole founder, owner, and chairman of M Holdings. When Jamal ran his fraudulent crypto empire into the ground and the federal government seized his assets, you defaulted on the massive business loans you co-signed for him. Your bank was terrified of holding your toxic debt. They were desperate to offload it to save their balance sheets. So my wealth manager stepped in and bought your mortgage for pennies on the dollar. I orchestrated the foreclosure. I signed the eviction order that locked you out of your house this afternoon." Caroline let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping her phone onto the sofa. "You cannot do that. That is our family home. You stole our house. You are a criminal." "I did not steal anything," I corrected her sharply, stepping around the coffee table to close the distance between us. "I legally purchased a distressed asset after your parents completely destroyed their own finances to fund your fake luxury lifestyle. You lost the house the minute you prioritized showing off to your country club friends over making sound financial decisions." Gregory slammed his fist on the coffee table, rattling the crystal wine glass I had left there. "I will take you to court," he roared, his face turning a mottled purple. "I will sue you for everything you have. That house belongs to me, and no predatory legal loophole is going to change that. You are my daughter, and you will transfer that deed back into my name immediately, or I will destroy you." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that made Brenda physically recoil. You have no money for a lawyer, Dad. You have zero credit, zero leverage, and absolutely no legal standing. You signed the loan agreements. You defaulted. The bank sold the debt. The transaction is ironclad, an entirely public record. You do not own a single brick of that property anymore. I leaned forward, looking directly into his panicked eyes. In fact, the only reason the local sheriff did not drag you out by the collar this afternoon is because I told my legal team to give you a slight extension. You have exactly 72 hours to go back there and clear out whatever garbage you left behind in the garage. Because on Monday morning I am sending a demolition crew to bulldoze that entire mansion to the ground. Brenda let out a guttural sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. "Bulldoze it!" she wailed, her voice cracking with sheer devastation. "Why? Why would you destroy a perfectly good estate? That house is our legacy." "Because I want to," I said, my voice completely stripped of any warmth. "Because that house represents everything rotten, superficial, and fake about this family. I am going to level it, clear the lot, and build a free community health clinic for children battling leukemia. I am going to name it after Leo, the grandson you abandoned in a freezing hospital room so you could go drink champagne on a yacht." The mention of Leo hit them like a physical blow. Brenda wept louder, sinking into the sofa cushions, but I felt absolutely no pity. They were finally experiencing a fraction of the helplessness and despair I had felt when I begged them for help to save my son. Jamal, who had been standing frozen by the hallway, suddenly snapped. His massive ego, already bruised by his spectacular financial ruin, could not handle being bested by a woman he considered entirely beneath him. He realized that my corporate maneuvering had exposed the catastrophic failure of his crypto scheme to the entire family. I was the architect of their ultimate humiliation, and he wanted someone to punish. "You think you are so smart?" Jamal snarled, his voice vibrating with raw, unfiltered rage. He kicked a designer suitcase out of his way and stomped toward the living room. "You think you can play God with our lives? You set us up. You planned this whole thing to make me look bad. You made yourself look bad, Jamal," I replied, standing my ground and refusing to break eye contact. "You ran an unlicensed brokerage and operated a Ponzi scheme. I just bought the wreckage you left behind." "Shut your mouth," Jamal roared, his face twisting into a mask of pure violence. He closed the distance between us in 2 rapid strides, his massive frame towering over me. He balled his hands into tight fists, his muscles tense and ready to strike. "I am not going to let some pathetic, bitter writer take everything from me. I will destroy you right here before I let you take another step." Caroline screamed at him to stop, terrified of the escalating violence, but Jamal was too enraged to listen. He raised his heavy arm, preparing to unleash his fury on me right in the middle of my own living room. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just looked at him with absolute, unwavering calm. Because right at that exact second, before Jamal could even swing his arm, the dark living room windows were violently illuminated. Flashing red and blue lights suddenly exploded across the front yard, casting a chaotic, strobing glare against the walls of my house. The piercing wail of police sirens cut through the howling winter wind outside. Heavy, authoritative footsteps began pounding rapidly up the wooden stairs of my front porch. Jamal's massive fist hovered just inches from my face. The deafening sound of heavy boots stomping onto my front porch shattered his violent concentration. He stumbled backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the front windows, where aggressive red and blue emergency lights sliced through the dark living room. The piercing wail of sirens outside drowned out the howling winter wind. I did not flinch. I reached into the thick manila folder and pulled out a second, much heavier stack of documents. With a swift, dismissive flick of my wrist, I tossed them directly at Jamal's chest. The papers hit him and scattered wildly across the floor, covering my expensive rug in damning, irrefutable evidence. "What is this?" Jamal stammered. His bravado entirely evaporated as a violent, rhythmic pounding on my front door began. "That is your digital autopsy," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. "You actually thought you were a cryptocurrency genius, Jamal. You thought you could hide stolen funds in decentralized ledgers and offshore wallets. But you forgot one crucial detail. When you have tens of millions of dollars at your disposal, you can afford to hire the most ruthless forensic accountants on Wall Street." I pointed to a specific spreadsheet lying near his designer sneaker. Those are the IP addresses of the servers you use to funnel your clients' money into your personal accounts. Next to it are the wire transfer receipts from the shell companies you set up in the Cayman Islands. And right beneath your foot is the comprehensive financial dossier I personally handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 months ago. Jamal's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. He looked down at the papers, seeing his entire fraudulent empire meticulously documented and exposed for the world to see. I did not just report your disgusting GoFundMe campaign to customer service. I continued, taking a slow step toward him. I submitted every single piece of evidence regarding your massive money laundering operation and your federal wire fraud. I handed the authorities the exact roadmap they needed to secure a federal indictment. You are not just broke, Jamal, you are going to federal prison. Federal Bureau of Investigation opened the door immediately, a booming amplified voice commanded from the porch. The sheer force of the demand made the living room windows rattle in their frames. Brenda shrieked, clutching Gregory's arm in sheer terror. Gregory collapsed back into his armchair, his chest heaving as if he were having a heart attack. They were paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the nightmare unfolding around them. Before anyone could move to unlock the deadbolt, a massive, thunderous crash echoed through the hallway. The federal agents did not wait for an invitation. They breached my front door with a tactical battering ram. The heavy wood splintered and gave way, flying open to let the freezing winter storm blow directly into my home. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents flooded into the entryway, their dark tactical gear and weapons, a terrifying contrast to the quiet suburban street. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, shouting commands that deafened the room. Hands where I can see them, everyone freeze. The lead agent roared, his weapon lowered but ready. His eyes instantly locked onto Jamal, matching his face to the warrant photograph. Jamal Davis, get on the ground right now. Face down, hands behind your back. Jamal panicked. The arrogant, wealthy crypto bro who had threatened to strike me just moments ago suddenly turned into a terrified coward. He took a frantic step backward, his eyes darting toward the back door, contemplating a completely futile escape. That single moment of hesitation was all the tactical team needed. 3 agents lunged forward, closing the distance in a split second. They grabbed Jamal by his shoulders and the back of his expensive sweater, driving his massive frame forcefully into the hardwood floor. The impact shook the coffee table and knocked over Brenda's wine glass. "Stop resisting! Give me your hands," an agent shouted, pinning Jamal's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like the ultimate finality of his doom. Caroline lost her mind completely. She dropped to her knees, screaming hysterically, tearing at her blonde hair. "Let him go. He did not do anything wrong. You are making a mistake," she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw hysteria. She tried to crawl toward her husband, but an agent swiftly stepped in her path, raising a firm hand to keep her back. "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be detained for interfering with a federal arrest." The agent warned, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Caroline collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The pristine, untouchable golden child was now a weeping mess on my living room floor, watching her husband being treated like a violent criminal. Brenda and Gregory were sobbing in the corner, clinging to each other, their wealthy, arrogant facade permanently destroyed. I stood completely still by the kitchen island, holding my wine glass. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply watched the execution of justice with a cold, absolute satisfaction. They had abandoned my dying son. They had tried to profit off his death. Now they were paying the ultimate price. The agents hauled Jamal to his feet. His designer clothes were covered in dust and scuff marks. His face was pressed against the cold air as they marched him roughly toward the open front door, reading him his Miranda rights in a rapid, monotone voice. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his terrified, defeated expression. As the agents dragged Jamal out onto the freezing porch, the chaotic scene in my doorway shifted once again. A new figure pushed his way through the swarm of law enforcement personnel gathered on the lawn. He was completely oblivious to the federal arrest happening right in front of him, entirely consumed by his own monumental arrogance. It was Derek. My ex-husband shoved his way past a federal agent, his face flushed with manic, greedy excitement. He was holding a thick stack of legal papers in his hand, clutching them like a winning lottery ticket. He stepped over the splintered wood of my broken door frame, looking around the living room with a wild, triumphant grin. He had seen the police cars and assumed I was the one in trouble. He thought he had arrived at the exact, perfect moment to exploit my downfall and claim his fortune. He had absolutely no idea he was walking straight into his own personal slaughterhouse. Derek stepped through the splintered remains of my front door, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the broken wood. He completely ignored the flashing police lights illuminating the front yard. He stepped right over my mother, who was still sobbing hysterically on the floor, and carelessly kicked one of Gregory's designer suitcases out of his path. He did not even glance at Caroline, who was curled into a ball, weeping over her husband's federal arrest. Derek was entirely consumed by his own monumental greed. He marched directly into the center of my living room, waving a thick stack of legal documents in the air like a battle flag. "Well, well, well," Derek sneered, looking around at the chaos before locking his eyes onto mine. "It looks like you are having a terrible night, Madeline, but I am afraid it is about to get a whole lot worse for you." I stood completely still, my wine glass still resting on the kitchen island. I watched the man who had abandoned his dying son to go shopping for a Tesla with his mistress. He looked disheveled. His tie was loose, his suit was wrinkled, and he reeked of cheap liquor and desperation. The corporate auditors had fired him just days ago, and his new wife had already gutted his bank accounts. Yet his narcissism blinded him to his own pathetic reality. "What do you want, Derek?" I asked, my voice chillingly calm. "I want what belongs to me," he barked, slamming his legal papers down on my coffee table, right next to the foreclosure deed that had just ruined my parents. He pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "You thought you were so clever. You thought you could hide behind shell companies and a fake name. But I hired an investigator. I tracked your internet protocol address. I know exactly who you are, M.L. Blackwood." My parents, still cowering on the floor, suddenly stopped crying. They looked up confused by the pseudonym. Derek did not care about their confusion. He was entirely focused on his grand extortion scheme. "I know about the New York Times bestseller list," Derek continued, his voice rising in triumphant hysteria. "I know about the massive royalty checks. And most importantly, I know about the 8-figure Netflix adaptation deal. You wrote that book while we were still legally married. You wrote it while you were sitting next to Leo's hospital bed. That makes every single page of that manuscript a joint marital asset. Under the law, I am entitled to exactly 50% of everything you have made and everything you will make from that franchise." He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "So here is the deal, Madeline. You are going to sign over half of that Netflix money right now, or I am going to drag you back into family court. I will file an emergency injunction to freeze every single one of your corporate accounts. I will bleed you dry in legal fees until you are begging to settle. Pay up or lose it all." For a long, heavy moment, the room was completely silent. The wind continued to howl outside the broken doorway. Derek stood there, a smug, greedy grin stretching across his face, waiting for me to panic. He was waiting for me to fall to my knees and beg for mercy, just like I had done in the hospital room a year ago. Instead, I threw my head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine, joyous laugh that echoed off the living room walls. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated victory. Derek's smug smile faltered, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He had expected terror. He had not expected amusement. "Are you out of your mind?" Derek shouted, his face flushing red. "I am taking half your empire. This is not a joke." "Oh, but it is the greatest joke of all time," I replied, walking unhurriedly toward my home office. I stepped back out a moment later, holding the final manila folder from my desk drawer. I walked right up to Derek, stopping mere inches from his face. "You really think you hit the jackpot, do you not?" I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal whisper. You think you can use the trauma of our son's death, the exact trauma you abandoned us in, to line your own pockets. You are right about one thing, Derek. I did write that book in the hospital, but you are completely wrong about the law. I pulled a document from my folder and slapped it hard against his chest. He grabbed it instinctively. Look at the date on that paper, I commanded. That is the official finalization of our divorce decree, the exact day the judge banged his gavel and legally dissolved our marriage. The same day you eagerly signed away all of your parental rights to save yourself a miserable few $1,000s a month in child support. Derek stared at the date, his breathing growing shallow. Now look at this, I said, pulling out a second document. It was heavily stamped with the official seal of the state of Delaware. This is the incorporation certificate for M Holdings, the corporate entity that owns the copyright to the book and holds the exclusive contract with Netflix. Read the establishment date, Derek. Read it out loud. Derek's eyes darted across the page. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His hands began to shake violently. I will read it for you, I said, leaning in closer. M Holdings was legally established and incorporated exactly 24 hours after our divorce was finalized. The copyright was not filed under my personal name. It was filed by the corporation. The Netflix contract was signed by the corporation. At the time those massive assets were legally created and registered, you and I were entirely legally divorced. There is no marital property. You have absolutely zero claim to a single cent of my empire. Derek stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the sofa. He looked from the divorce decree to the corporate filings, the devastating reality crashing down on him. He had rushed the divorce to avoid paying child support. In his greedy haste to abandon his responsibilities, he had legally locked himself out of a multi-million-dollar fortune. He had handed me the exact timeline I needed to shield my wealth. No. Derek gasped, his voice cracking with sheer panic. No, that cannot be right. I can sue you for hiding assets. I can claim you acted in bad faith. I will find a lawyer. You do not have the money to hire a lawyer, Derek, I reminded him ruthlessly. You were fired for embezzling corporate funds. Your new wife emptied your bank accounts and left you. You are destitute. You tried to play a game of chess with me, and you checkmated yourself. Derek dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor, landing next to the foreclosure deed that had ruined my parents. He looked absolutely broken, a pathetic hollow shell of the arrogant man who had walked through my door minutes ago. He raised his hands, a desperate, pleading look entering his eyes. Madeline, please, he begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whine. I have nothing left. I am going to lose my apartment. I cannot find a job. We were married for years. We had children together. You have millions of dollars. You can afford to help me. Just a small cut. Please, Madeline. I looked at the man who had told me to deal with my dying son alone because I was interrupting his shopping spree. I am not quite finished with you yet, Derek, I said softly. I reached into the back of my manila folder. I pulled out one final thick envelope. I held it up so the flashing police lights from outside illuminated the bold, terrifying seal printed on the front cover. It was the official logo of the Internal Revenue Service. The bold, terrifying seal printed on the front cover. It was the official logo of the Internal Revenue Service. Derek stared at the thick envelope in my hand. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside cast long, erratic shadows across his pale, sweating face. His eyes darted from the federal seal to my completely emotionless expression. The smug, victorious arrogance that had defined his entire existence was evaporating by the second, replaced by a creeping, suffocating terror. What is that? Derek whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. This is the ultimate consequence of your boundless greed, Derek, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. When you dragged me into family court to slash your child support obligations, you submitted sworn financial affidavits to the judge. You swore under penalty of perjury that your corporate income had drastically decreased. You legally claimed you were practically broke and could not afford to support Mason, Lily, and Noah. I opened the heavy envelope and pulled out a massive stack of banking records. Entire paragraphs and account numbers were highlighted in bright fluorescent yellow ink, But you forgot one very important detail about my new reality, I continued, my voice echoing sharply in the silent living room. I have access to the absolute best forensic accountants money can buy. I initially hired them to dismantle Jamal's pathetic crypto fraud, but I paid them double to audit your entire financial history. I ordered them to track every single bank account, every corporate wire transfer, and every hidden asset you thought you cleverly concealed from the world. Derek took a clumsy step backward, bumping into the edge of my coffee table. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he realized exactly what I held in my hands. "They found it all, Derek," I stated, holding the highlighted papers right in front of his face. "They found the offshore shell accounts in the Cayman Islands where you have been funneling your corporate embezzlement. They found the massive annual executive bonuses you purposely hid from the IRS to avoid paying your fair share of federal taxes. But worst of all, they found the hundreds of thousands of dollars you actively concealed so you could avoid paying a single cent toward Leo's mounting medical bills." I watched his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated panic. "When our 10-year-old son was fighting for his life, the hospital administrators were demanding payments. You claimed you had zero liquidity. You legally declared you were drowning in debt. You let our son die," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal razor-sharp register that made Brenda and Gregory flinch in the corner. "You let him suffocate in a freezing hospital room because you claimed you were broke. Meanwhile, you were sitting on a mountain of stolen hidden cash buying luxury cars and diamond necklaces for your mistress." Derek dropped to his knees. The wealthy, powerful regional director was entirely gone. In his place was a pathetic, terrified criminal staring down the barrel of federal prosecution. He knew exactly what the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service did to wealthy tax evaders. "You committed gross perjury in federal court, Derek. You committed massive systematic tax evasion." I took this entire forensic dossier and handed it directly to the federal authorities 3 months ago. The audit is completely finished. The IRS knows exactly what you stole. "Madeline, please," Derek sobbed loudly, burying his face in his trembling hands. "You cannot do this to me. The feds do not mess around with tax evasion. They will put me in federal prison for years. I will not survive in a maximum security facility. Please, I am begging you." He reached out desperately, trying to grab the hem of my sweater, but I took a sharp step back in utter disgust. "We used to love each other." Derek pleaded, tears streaming down his face and dripping onto my hardwood floor. "We built a beautiful family together once upon a time. Think about Mason. Think about Lily and little Noah. Do you really want your innocent children to grow up knowing their father is rotting in a federal prison? Have some mercy, Madeline. I am begging you for the sake of our past." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no hesitation, just cold, pure, absolute justice. "Mercy," I repeated, savoring the bitter taste of the word. "Let me tell you about mercy, Derek." I crouched down slightly so I was directly at eye level with his pathetic, tear-stained face. "When I called you from the pediatric intensive care unit, begging you to come to the hospital because our son's organs were actively failing, I asked for mercy. I begged you for physical help. I pleaded with you to just come watch your other children so I could sign the emergency surgical consent forms. And do you remember exactly what you said to me?" Derek squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically side to side. "Please, Madeline, do not do this. Look at me," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. He opened his eyes, terrified. "You told me you were busy at the Tesla showroom picking out custom interior colors with Courtney. You called me a broke, pathetic freelance writer. You told me to deal with my own mess. You actively chose a luxury car over your dying child's final moments on this earth." I stood back up, towering over his kneeling form. "You wanted me to deal with my own mess. So I did. I built an empire, and now you are going to deal with yours." Derek wailed, a pathetic, guttural sound of total defeat. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will do anything. I will sign over the house. I will give you every single penny in the offshore accounts. Just call them off." "It is way too late for apologies," I said flatly. "And I do not need you to sign anything. I already have all the money I will ever need. Besides, the IRS does not negotiate with tax evaders who hide stolen assets in the Cayman Islands. I turned my gaze toward the splintered front doorway. The federal agents who had just arrested Jamal were standing by their armored vehicles securing the perimeter of my property. Several local police officers were stationed near my front porch, observing the absolute chaos inside my house. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, deliberate nod to the officers standing outside in the cold. Derek looked up, following my gaze through the broken door frame. He watched in sheer horror as two heavily armed police officers detached themselves from the group and marched purposefully up my front steps. They stepped through the entryway, their expressions grim and strictly professional. Derek Vance, the lead officer, announced, his authoritative voice booming through my living room. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of tax evasion and criminal fraud." Derek scrambled backward on his hands and knees, bumping hard into my mother, who was still paralyzed with shock on the floor. "No," Derek screamed, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. "No, wait. Just let me call my lawyer. I have money. We can settle this. You have the right to remain silent." The officer continued loudly, grabbing Derek by the shoulder and hauling him roughly to his feet. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Derek thrashed wildly, trying to pull his arms away, but the second officer stepped in immediately, twisting Derek's arms forcefully behind his back. The cold metallic snap of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoed sharply in the room. It was the exact same sound Jamal had heard just minutes ago. "Madeline, please," Derek shrieked as the officers dragged him forcefully toward the door. "Tell them to stop. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I will give you everything." "You already gave me everything I needed, Derek," I replied coldly, crossing my arms. "You gave me the motivation to destroy you." The officers hauled a sobbing, violently struggling Derek out into the freezing November night. He was shoved aggressively into the back of a waiting police cruiser. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing his fate completely. He was going to federal prison, stripped of his wealth, his career, his mistress, and his freedom. I slowly turned around to face the only people left in my living room. Brenda Gregory and Caroline were staring at me in absolute trembling horror. The execution was almost complete. The heavy metal doors of the police cruisers slammed shut outside, cutting off Derek's pathetic wails. The tires screeched against the freezing asphalt as the vehicles pulled away, taking my deceitful ex-husband to a federal holding cell. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the dark November night, leaving my living room illuminated only by the warm, steady glow of the fireplace. I turned away from the splintered doorframe and looked down at the three people remaining in my house. Brenda Gregory and Caroline were huddled together on the floor, surrounded by the scattered, damning financial documents that had just destroyed two arrogant men. They looked absolutely ruined. The expensive designer clothes they wore could not hide the pathetic, trembling cowards underneath. They had watched me systematically dismantle Jamal and Derek with surgical precision, and they finally realized they were standing in the exact same crosshairs. Caroline was backed into the corner near the sofa, hyperventilating so violently her chest heaved with ragged, sharp gasps. The pristine golden child, whose entire life had been funded by fraud and parental favoritism, was completely paralyzed by the reality of her impending poverty. Her husband was going to federal prison. Her luxury cars were gone. Her yacht parties were over. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, too petrified to even form a complete sentence. Gregory and Brenda did not have the luxury of silence. Panic, raw and humiliating, entirely consumed them. Gregory, the man who had spent his entire life looking down his nose at me, suddenly collapsed to his knees. He crawled forward on my hardwood floor, ignoring the expensive fabric of his trousers. Brenda fell to her knees right beside him, tears destroying her heavy makeup, leaving dark, ugly streaks down her cheeks. "Madeline, please," Gregory begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine. "You have made your point. You are powerful. You are wealthy. We understand. But please, you cannot throw us out into the street. It is Thanksgiving. It is freezing outside. We have absolutely nowhere to go. Our credit is completely destroyed." Brenda reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I stepped back, my face turning to stone. "Madeline, look at me," she sobbed, clasping her hands together in a pathetic prayer. "We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. I am your mother. You have to forgive us. Family makes mistakes, but family always forgives. You cannot just erase us from your life." I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. I felt absolutely no anger anymore. I felt no sorrow. I felt nothing but a profound empty void where a daughter's love used to reside. "I am not erasing you," I said, my voice dropping to a flat, emotionless register that made them both flinch. "You erased yourselves." Brenda shook her head frantically. "No, we were just misguided. We were stressed about Caroline. We made terrible choices, but we still love you. We are still your family." "Do not ever use that word in my house again," I commanded softly. "Family is a word earned through loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional love. You do not get to invoke the sacred title of parent just because you are out of options and facing the freezing cold. You want to talk about being my mother, Brenda? Let us talk about what a real mother does. A real mother does not tell her daughter to hire a babysitter when her 10-year-old grandson is bleeding out on a surgical table. A real grandfather does not pop champagne on a luxury yacht while his daughter stands in the freezing rain burying her child in a cheap wooden casket. Gregory opened his mouth to offer another pathetic excuse, but I held up my hand, silencing him instantly. "You want forgiveness." I continued, my gaze locking onto theirs with absolute unwavering intensity. "You want me to welcome you into the warmth of my home, feed you my food, and protect you from the storm outside. You want the exact same mercy you explicitly denied me when I was drowning in grief. You want to pretend that the past year was just a simple misunderstanding. But here's the undeniable truth. You did not just fail me. You actively participated in my destruction. You tried to exploit the tragic death of my son to pay off your luxury debts. You tried to gaslight me into believing I was crazy, selfish, and broke." Caroline let out a loud, choked sob from the corner, gripping her knees to her chest. I did not even look at her. "You died to me." I stated, the finality of the words hanging heavy in the quiet room. "You died to me the exact moment Leo took his last breath alone in that hospital room, while you were all too busy showing off your fake wealth to care. The people kneeling on my floor right now are complete strangers. You are just trespassers who overstayed their welcome." Brenda wailed loudly, burying her face against Gregory's shoulder. Gregory looked up at me, his eyes searching for any tiny fraction of hesitation or pity. He found absolutely none. The execution was complete. The verdict was final. "Get up," I ordered, pointing my finger directly toward the splintered front doorway. "Get off your knees, pick up your designer bags, and get off my property immediately." "But we will freeze," Brenda cried out, her voice echoing with sheer desperation. "Then I suggest you start walking fast," I replied coldly. The federal agents left Jamal's rental car in the driveway. "I suggest you take it and drive until you find a homeless shelter that takes platinum credit cards. You have exactly 30 seconds to clear my hallway before I call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing." Gregory realized the battle was entirely lost. His pride had been crushed into dust. His empire stolen, his golden child ruined. He grabbed Brenda by the arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. Caroline scrambled up from the corner, grabbing her coat and sobbing uncontrollably. They did not say another word. They did not dare. They frantically grabbed the handles of their heavy, oversized luggage and dragged them toward the exit. I stood motionless in the center of the living room, watching them stumble out onto the porch. The brutal, biting winter wind whipped against their faces, tossing their hair wildly as they stepped out into the freezing, unforgiving night. They dragged their expensive suitcases down the concrete walkway, shivering and weeping, walking away from the warmth, wealth, and safety they had arrogantly assumed was theirs for the taking. I stepped forward, grabbing the edge of my heavy wooden front door. I looked out into the darkness one last time, watching their retreating figures disappear into the harsh winter storm. Then I pushed the heavy door closed. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sharp, satisfying snap, locking them out forever. The howling wind was instantly muffled, completely cut off by the thick wood and secure glass. I stood in the entryway, taking a deep, slow breath. The silence in the house was absolutely beautiful. The silence in the house was absolutely beautiful. I rested my forehead against the cool, solid wood of the front door for just a moment, letting out a long, steady exhale. The toxic anchor that had dragged me down for 34 years was finally severed. I turned around, walking past the spot on the rug where Jamal had been handcuffed, past the coffee table where Derek had realized his total financial ruin, and I made my way up the wooden staircase. I opened the door to my master bedroom. The contrast between the chaos that had just unfolded downstairs and the scene in front of me was breathtaking. Mason, Lily, and Noah were sitting in a circle on the plush carpet, completely safe and entirely oblivious to the brutal executions that had just taken place. They were rolling dice and moving colorful pieces across their board game, their bright laughter filling the room. They looked up when I walked in, their faces glowing with innocent joy. "Is the adult business all done?" Mason asked, tilting his head. "Yes, sweetie." I smiled, feeling a profound, radiant warmth spread through my chest. "The adult business is completely finished, and the turkey is ready. Let us go have Thanksgiving dinner." They cheered, abandoning their game to race down the stairs. I followed them into the kitchen where the rich aromas of roasted vegetables, savory gravy, and fresh herbs had chased away the stale scent of my former family. We set the dining table together. I poured apple cider into crystal glasses for the kids and refilled my own glass of red wine. We sat down, joining hands. I looked at their smiling, healthy faces, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, unconditionally secure. We ate, we laughed, and we shared what we were thankful for. There were no insults, no passive-aggressive comparisons, and absolutely no stress. After dinner, while the kids were curled up on the living room sofa watching a holiday movie, I walked over to the brick fireplace. Resting on the center of the wooden mantel was a silver-framed photograph of Leo. It was taken the summer before he got sick. He was wearing his favorite baseball cap, holding a melted ice cream cone, and smiling with that bright, courageous spark that defined his entire existence. I reached out and gently touched the cool glass over his face. "I did it, my sweet boy," I whispered into the quiet room. "I made them pay. I protected your brothers and your sister. We are safe now." The grief of losing him would never completely vanish. It was a permanent scar etched into my soul. But the agonizing, suffocating guilt of being unable to save him had finally dissolved. I had taken the horrific tragedy of his death and weaponized it against the very people who had abandoned him. I had used their boundless greed and bottomless arrogance to build an empire, and then I had crushed them with the exact same weight they had tried to drop on me. But the massive wealth sitting in the M Holdings corporate trusts was not just meant for vengeance. It was meant for salvation. In the weeks following that chaotic Thanksgiving night, I officially launched my most important project. I established a massive, heavily funded charitable organization named the Leo Foundation. I took millions of dollars from my book royalties and streaming adaptation deals and funneled them directly into this charity. The Leo Foundation was explicitly designed to help single mothers navigating the terrifying, bankrupting nightmare of having a child diagnosed with a terminal illness. I hired top-tier lawyers, aggressive social workers, and compassionate financial advisors. We paid for emergency childcare so mothers could sit in the intensive care unit without worrying about their other kids at home. We covered crippling medical bills, aggressive out-of-network treatments, and paid for rent and groceries when these women were forced to take unpaid leave from their jobs. I made absolutely sure that no mother in my program would ever have to stand in a freezing hospital room and beg a toxic, narcissistic family member for help. I ensured they would never have to call a cruel ex-husband and endure verbal abuse just to get a ride to the pharmacy. The Leo Foundation became the exact safety net that I had been brutally denied. We provided financial armor, and in doing so, we honored Leo's memory in the most powerful way imaginable. As the months turned into years, my career only grew. The television adaptation of my thriller became a global phenomenon. I continued writing, securing massive publishing contracts, and expanding my anonymous corporate empire. I bought a beautiful, sprawling estate for Mason, Lily, and Noah, a place surrounded by nature filled with light and heavily guarded against anyone who might try to disrupt our peace. Derek was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for massive tax evasion and fraud. Jamal received an even longer sentence for his crypto money laundering scheme. Caroline, stripped of her fake wealth, and her fraudulent husband was forced to move into a tiny, rundown apartment working minimum-wage retail jobs to survive. Brenda and Gregory, evicted from their pristine mansion, filed for total bankruptcy and moved into a miserable, cramped trailer park on the outskirts of the city, shunned by the country club society they had sacrificed their own daughter to impress. They tried reaching out a few times, sending pathetic, pleading letters to my lawyer's office. The letters were always returned to sender unopened and unread. As I stand on the balcony of my new estate today, watching the sun set over the horizon, I look back at the desperate, terrified woman I used to be. I remember the tears I shed in that hospital room and the agonizing silence of an empty cemetery. But those memories no longer hold any power over me. They taught me the hardest, most valuable lesson of my life. Blood doesn't make family, loyalty does. Family is not determined by a shared last name or a biological connection. It is determined by who is willing to stand in the freezing rain with you when your world is falling apart. They thought they could break me. They thought I was a pathetic, starving writer who would just roll over and accept their abuse. But they underestimated the terrifying, unstoppable force of a mother who has nothing left to lose. The sweetest revenge is building an empire on the ashes of those who tried to burn you. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. The most profound lesson from Madeline's journey is that true family isn't defined by shared DNA, but by unwavering loyalty during our darkest moments. When faced with unimaginable grief, she realized that toxic relatives who prioritize their superficial image over a child's life are merely strangers. Instead of breaking under their cruelty, she channeled her pain into building an independent empire and a foundation of genuine care. Her story teaches us that walking away from abusive blood ties is not a failure, but a courageous, necessary step towards self-preservation. Have you ever had to cut ties to protect your peace? Share your story and comment below.